Northern Ireland certainly a bit brighter and drier than yesterday, and it is still very mild out there. Low pressure is anchored out to the southwest, and it's throwing up these weather fronts. Quite a wet start across much of Scotland, and this little weather feature bringing some quite heavy downpours across parts of eastern England, extending into the Midlands across northern England. So very wet in this zone this afternoon. Some further heavy pulses of rain coming into the southeast as well, but perhaps brightening up later along the south coast. Certainly a drier, brighter day for South Wales, southwest England and Northern Ireland compared to yesterday. It's pretty mild, but it doesn't feel all that pleasant under the rain across northern England, southern Scotland. Here a cool feel, just 12 or 13 Celsius at best. That rain will continue to spiral its way across most of Scotland this evening, so further outbreaks of rain to come here. Drying up for many elsewhere until further bands of showers come up from the southwest. These, again, likely to be pretty lively with some heavy downpours mixed in. Again, it's going to be pretty mild. Temperature staying in double digits for the vast majority. Some mist and fog patches likely to, particularly around the middle of the night. That'll clear as the winds pick up, and it's going to be a blustery day on Friday with bands of showers just shipping in from the southwest. There'll be some brighter spells, particularly over eastern England, probably a brighter day compared to today. But showers will spread in almost everywhere. They'll tend to zip through on the fairly brisk wind, and again, it will be mild. But again, it'll feel cooler when those showers come along because of that gusty wind, which continues to spiral showers across all areas as we go through Friday evening. So bear that in mind if you are heading out. It could be a fairly soggy one. Those showers, again, zipping through on a brisk wind. Staying blustery and mild this weekend. More showers to come, particularly so on Sunday, but some drier weather in the south on Saturday.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello and a very warm welcome to GB Newsday, and we've got breaking news coming through, even by the standards of Westminster politics, the past 24 hours. Complete chaos for Liz Truss and her government, and the latest is that Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the influential 1922 Committee of Backbenchers, has gone into number 10 for a meeting with the Prime Minister. More Tory MPs this morning going public to say she should leave number 10. The tally 14 at the moment. The latest being Henry Smith, Cheryl Murray and Miriam Cates. So with her party in seemingly open revolt, will this be the day that Liz Truss is finally told to leave number 10? Tom is here with us in the studio, and we understand, Tom, that this was a meeting at Liz Truss's request?
Yes, Number 10 have said today, just in the last few minutes, that this was the request of the Prime Minister rather than the request of the chairman of the 1922 committee. Number 10 say that they have been meeting on an almost daily basis and that Liz Truss wants to sort of gauge the mood of the party. However, it's reasonable to treat that with a little bit of scepticism because, of course, the person who has been the key conduit between the parliamentary party and the Prime Minister over the course of the last 5 weeks has been Sir Graham Brady. He was the person who, it is understood, met with Liz Truss on Monday afternoon to tell her that the 56th threshold may well have been
This
breached.
is the letters going into the 1922 committee from the MPs.
Exactly. No confidence letters. 15% of the party ordinarily in normal times would cause a no confidence vote. However, we're not in normal times because a no confidence balance happened just a few months ago. There is a 12-month immunity period following that. The executive of the 22 could, however, change the rules at their arbitrary whim.
And now 14 Conservative MPs have gone public with their demands for Liz Truss to quit. That doesn't sound like a huge number, but it's doubled in 24 hours. How serious is that number, 14 that are willing to go public?
Exactly. I think that's the key point, willing to go public. We understand that there are far, far more who have submitted their letters privately. Now, it's so tempting to talk about letters because they're sort of a very dramatic and obvious thing. But really, so much of how Liz Truss's premiership may survive or otherwise is based on the mood rather than the actual numbers of things. And if Graham Brady says, look, you just have completely lost this authority, he may well be someone who could tell her the gig is up. And he has been the person throughout the last few weeks. He was the person who said, look, you're not going to be able to get the 45p rate of tax cut through. You're going to have to U-turn on that. He was the person who has, throughout this, at every stage of Liz Truss's premiership, been the bearer of bad news, if you will, in terms of where the party sits.
Is the other dynamic the fact that when the MPs are no longer frightened of the whips, that's when they really start, the discipline breaks down and they go public. And, it's not just the numbers, it's what they're saying. Looking at Henry Smith, member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I saw Liz Truss in action as the Foreign Secretary, and I knew that she would be out of her depth as Prime Minister. This is a senior committee member actually saying that in public. So did the events of last night with this fracking vote really break that omerta, the silence that MPs normally have?
I think, if anything, it demonstrated what was fairly widely understood beforehand, just the lack of authority. This feels like a minority government, and yet it's a government with a majority of
Still
over
a huge
70.
Majority, yeah.
And they won that vote handsomely, actually, after all that.
They did.
About 48 Tory MPs didn't vote with the whip, did they?
Despite Wendy Morton, the chief whip, apparently resigning halfway through that vote and then unresigning a couple of hours later. Number 10 said she never resigned at all, but according to members of Parliament who were in that division lobby, it was chaos.
Now, let me tell you, because I was messaging a couple of Tory MPs this morning, their assessment's very different. So one Tory MP this morning told me this: I suspect there is a strong possibility she will have announced a resignation by the end of today. Let me just tell you, read out another message from a Tory MP. I said, is it possible to rescue? Not sure now. Now she has promoted one of the ringleaders who may help her to stay. Two Tory MPs.
Well, they're talking about Grant Shapps.
Yeah.
Right.
So who do you go along with out of my two Tory MP sources this morning, Tom?
Please don't make me predict the future. This is an absolute nightmare for anyone in the game of political forecasting. You talk to two different MPs, perhaps talking to 5 MPs, you might get 15 different ideas of what could happen.
Let's just explain to viewers and listeners the difficulty in this, because obviously the rules say once she is selected and elected by the party membership, no further election for a year. So we've had a month gone, 11 months remaining. What is the process to bypass that? What has to happen?
It's a simple majority of the executive of the 1922 committee. Now, there were elections just this week to replace a couple of members on that executive.
Change the rules.
And if they so choose, that executive can call a meeting and change the rules. It's as simple as that. They don't need a supermajority. They don't need the party board. The 1922 committee is self-governing and can do that. It would be led by its officers, which are the senior exec members. Now, they had a meeting on Monday, which is a more rare affair. But it's interesting to note that when it came to the removal of Boris Johnson and the removal of Theresa May, neither of those were a formal process. They both won their confidence votes of the party, and then a few weeks later were told the jig is up by the 22. Allegedly, when it came to the case of Theresa May, Sir Graham said, and this is not confirmed, but this is believed by many MPs, that Sir Graham said, we have the numbers to change these rules, we will unless you resign.
Let's just update people with what the Prime Minister's official spokesman said to reporters, and we know that these lobby briefings, obviously, the message changes from time to time. We're now being told that Downing Street said there is no change to Liz Truss's plan to stay in number 10 beyond the fiscal plan on October 31st. This is when Jeremy Hunt announces the latest tax plans. Asked the question, the Prime Minister's official spokesman, no plans for any change. The Prime Minister will continue. And then we understand Sir Graham Brady arrived after that lobby briefing.
So, yes, we understand that he arrived, I think, during it, because the lobby briefing will have ended at about midday. They start at 11:30 and usually run about half an hour, unless it's a particularly hectic time. But, yes, Sir Graham Brady was spotted going in the back door of number 10. And because that happened in the midst of that, reporters will have asked the spokesman what's going on, and we get the line from number 10 that this was a request of the Prime Minister.
Yeah. Is this what they have traditionally said, the men in grey suits going to a Prime Minister and suggesting, Prime Minister, I think you need to consider your position? So there's no official, this is the numbers, these are the letters. It's just a chat saying, I think you've lost the confidence of the House.
If that were the impetus of Sir Graham Brady, that would likely be the case. But I think we do probably have to, for the moment, take number 10 at their word, that this was Liz Truss asking, where's the party at? What can I do? Do I need to perhaps reshuffle my cabinet? How can I try and bring in more? And of course, it's very important. We shouldn't skate over the appointment of Grant Shapps. Mr. Spreadsheet himself.
He's a key figure, isn't he? Can he save her? Bringing somebody who was sort of her arch critic into that key position, one of the great officers of state. He's now at her right hand, she hopes.
He is now inside the tent. And, of course, he was going around Conservative Party conference in what feels like an age ago now with his new smartphone, one of these foldable smartphones that can get very, very large, and he was showing off his spreadsheets on them. Now, why is he called Mr. Spreadsheet in Parliament? Because he is a good organiser. He records conversations with MPs, what MPs are feeling towards leadership contenders, what their mood is like towards the government, and so thereby understanding better than perhaps even the whips where the party might be moving.
I'm just thinking of that line from the Jaws film, we're going to need a bigger phone. How large does it fold out, you know? I mean, as you were saying, 14 maybe is actually just the tip of an iceberg, where a lot of people are saying these things privately. Where are we with the Commons business today? Because quite clearly with that meltdown last night, it's when these MPs get together and chat in the tea rooms and discuss events, that's when things start to get some sort of momentum.
It certainly is, although perhaps the worst thing for Liz Truss will not be MPs mingling in the tea rooms. It'll be tomorrow when MPs return to their constituencies.
Talk to people.
I've seen some reports of Conservative MPs doing a bit of canvassing, of groups doing a bit of canvassing, knocking on the doors, saying the doorsteps now are harder for the Tories than back at the height of the Partygate scandal.
But, you know, there's no easy answers to this, because even if the doorsteps are hostile, which if you look at opinion polls they undoubtedly are, changing a Prime Minister, having your third Prime Minister in the same year is utterly absurd.
It is.
So there's no sort of surefire way to Conservative MPs keeping their seats. Both roads, which they may take, have serious challenges in them.
And the estimate, I think I'm right in saying, is with all the polls taken into consideration, if we do go for a general election at the moment, some 200 Tory MPs could well lose their seats. Not just those red wall seats they gained, but in the shires as well.
Oh, absolutely. What's the so-called blue wall in the southeast of England. But I think it is fair to say that polls are snapshots rather than predictions. 200-seat loss does seem like a huge thing. This is at the point at which the Tory party is in open warfare with itself. Now, a general election, were it to be called, and we're not expecting one would be called now, why would the Tory party call a general election? That would be a suicide wish.
Well, if they change Prime Minister to a coronation, I mean, a lot of them have said that the calls outside the Tory party for this to be then an election of the public, a general election, they'd be very difficult to ignore.
But there's no constitutional reason why they should. They could very happily sit very unpopularly for another 2 years in government. But the fundamental constitutional point is that it's Parliament that decides these things. Actually, now the royal prerogative has reverted back to the Prime Minister with the repeal of the Fixed Terms Parliament Act. So it's not Parliament that votes. It's actually the Prime Minister's discretion as to whether or not a general election happens, unless, of course, there's a motion of no confidence, in which case Parliament would automatically dissolve itself.
And there are real sort of policy issues which are at the centre of arguably what happened with Suella Braverman and the letter that she published, which had where she had reservations about the government's immigration policy because of growth and the need for growth. There is now a suggestion that Jeremy Hunt may make it more easier for people to come here and work. And Downing Street today has refused to say that Liz Truss will stick to the Conservative Party's manifesto pledge to reduce net migration overall. Again, that wasn't in the manifesto.
It wasn't in the manifesto, although it must be said that net migration had been higher under the last year of Boris Johnson than it was before the referendum. Interestingly, though, that wasn't a particular political problem for Boris Johnson, because it was seen to be the kind of migration that was coming was under this Australian-style points-based system. People who could speak English, people who had skills, doctors, nurses, IT technicians, the rest of it. That's the kind of stuff that people don't seem to mind so much. What people hate is the illegal immigration, the boats.
Suella wasn't suggesting that, though, was she, in her letter? She was saying that she was concerned that the numbers wouldn't come down overall.
She was saying both, absolutely. She was taking the most hardline position, but also she had made her key signature thing as Home Secretary, stopping those boats.
OK, our camera's going to stick with number 10 on the front door, even though, as Tom's indicated, Sir Graham Brady may scuttle out the back, but we'll certainly see what happens
John
there.
McTernan, our next guest, used to work behind that door that we are seeing on the screen. He used to work for Tony Blair when he was Prime Minister between 2005 and 2007. John, are you there?
I am, yeah.
Hello, John. Hi, John.
I'm watching the door.
What is it like? You have been in that building that we are looking at when you have worked for a Prime Minister coming under pressure from their party to go. Just tell us what it is like to be in that situation.
Partly, there's a moment when you feel powerless, when all of the forces that are swirling around have escaped your control, because there are always a lot of loyal backbenchers. But those loyal backbenchers, when they see the attacks coming again and again and again on the Prime Minister, as it happened in my time, or for example, that period when all of those PPSs who nobody had ever heard of were resigning to put pressure on Tony, what happens is finally backbenchers go, we need a quiet life. It would be better if we stop this conflict. And so Tony left earlier from number 10 than he planned to do, because the pressure from Gordon and Gordon's supporters got so irresistible that a lot of backbenchers, MPs, loyal MPs who would like to see Tony stay longer, just wanted a quiet life. This is a different crisis, I think. This is a crisis of confusion, because Tory MPs want something to happen. They want it to happen soon. They want to be put out of their misery, but they don't want to lose their own seats, which is the election prospect. They don't know really how to dynamite the Prime Minister out because, look at the length of time it took to get Boris Johnson out when the party had clearly decided, the Parliament Party clearly decided. There's a lot of power in incumbency, they always say. There's a lot of power in stubbornness. And so if the thing that people used to say about Donald Trump is you can't shame a shameless person. A lot of the pressures on the Prime Minister to move, to do something are social. They're peer group pressures. And the question is, if the PM doesn't want to listen, what can you do to make them listen?
Remember those times when Gordon Brown then replaced Tony Blair and it was said that it was a selection, not an election. And, of course, the pressure on going to the country for a general election. The same taking place now for a second time if Liz Truss is replaced. I mean, it would be very difficult for the Tory party, even though technically they could stay there for another 18 months, 2 years, to ignore those calls for a general election if someone else goes through that door, number 10, as Prime Minister.
The ludicrous idea of having your third Prime Minister in a year, presumably a reshuffle, but we're already on our fourth Home Secretary in a few years. We are on our fourth Chancellor in the year. I mean, we're at a stage of kind of Whitehall farce, in one door, out the other door. And I think, yes, it's absolutely technically true. This Parliament could run as late, the next election could be as late as January 2025, which is really hard to imagine. The issue really for any Prime Minister, any government, is you only govern at the pleasure of others. You cannot command the confidence of the House of Commons. If you can't get your business through, you can't. And
We're just getting some breakdown on the signal with you, John. We'll try and get a better line to you shortly. But Olivia's joining us now in the studio.
Our political correspondent.
Yeah.
Hello. Hello and welcome.
Thank you.
What is going on today, as you understand it? You've got your phone in your hand.
It's just dipping your toe in the water. Yeah.
Got my phone in my hand, speaking to a few people. So what's happening at the moment is Graham Brady is speaking to Liz Truss. Obviously, he spoke to Liz Truss a couple of days ago. That was said to be a routine meeting. Can't quite see why he'd need another routine meeting with Liz Truss 2 days later. So there's a question over, is he telling her to go? It looks like not. The latest information is that Liz Truss actually called the meeting herself with Graham Brady, but it looks as though perhaps he's speaking to her about, one source is saying that he's speaking to her about a possible change in the rules. There's been talk over the last few days that obviously there only needs to be 15% of MPs to say they have no confidence in the Prime Minister for it to go to a vote of no confidence. But because Truss has this grace period of 1 year since taking office, that doesn't apply. There's talk that Graham Brady and the 1922 Executive Committee want to change that to, if 50% of MPs say they have no confidence, then perhaps it wouldn't reach a vote at all. But in short, Graham Brady is running Liz Truss through where she stands with MPs now.
And do we know what the understanding is about the number of letters that's gone in? I mean, so Graham Brady plays his cards very close to his chest, but there are people who sort of talk and whisper in the corridors. I mean, is it a substantial number?
What it sounds like is it may be as high as a third. There was talk of 56, 57 a couple of days ago, but that's obviously gone up since then. We've gone from the number sort of publicly declaring, obviously that's no indication really of how many privately have no confidence, but has gone from 3 to 12, 14 this morning. So it's a very, very fluid situation moving fast.
Let me just go back to John McTernan. John, are you still with us? John, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine, yeah.
Oh, perfect. So pleased to have you back. Look, I just want to explore the human aspects of this, just because you have been at close quarters with a Prime Minister who has come under pressure to go from their own party. Couple of questions, really. How do they emotionally and mentally cope when they are under siege by their own colleagues? And the second question is, when do they realise the game is up?
So you have to. I've been with two prime ministers who have come under this kind of pressure. Tony Blair in Number 10 and Julia Gillard in Australia. And I think the way that you come through this, because both of those prime ministers I worked for have had great careers after politics, is you have to stand on your achievements. You have to believe that you made a difference. You have to think that actually it mattered the time that you were there in the top job, and you can look back and point at things, which I think is going to be difficult for Liz Truss, because she really, her major achievement, the mini budget, has been ripped up by her own Chancellor, first by the markets, then by her Chancellor. And the second thing is, all politicians, in my experience, know when the time has come to go. All of them know when they've lost it, because they live and breathe politics. They've been working in the House of Commons for years. They've been working with the colleagues for years. And that's the thing. You have to believe that the Prime Minister knows she's got to go, because this is not tolerable. What you have left always is your dignity, your own dignity and professional respect. And that's what's ebbing away at the moment, is the dignity. It's better to go on your own terms than to be forced out. Better to go and define why you're going, even in these difficult situations like now. You do, and make sure you say you're doing it for the country, not for the party. The public want the Prime Minister to be the Prime Minister for the whole country. The danger of the situation the Tories are in at the moment is everything seems to be about the party, about the Conservative Party first and foremost, and nobody else gets a look in.
The whole question about legacy. As we're speaking to you, John, we're just going to alert our viewers and listeners to the fact we now have a picture of the rear gate, the rear exit of Number 10. Olivia, our new political correspondent, still with us. No escape now for some Graham Brady. We've got our cameras covering every exit of Number 10. We are seeing some comings and goings. I think that is Therese Coffey, who, let's reflect, Olivia, was accused of manhandling last night outside the lobby with this vote on fracking.
Yeah, truly extraordinary scenes last night in that vote. There were claims, Chris Bryant was claiming that he had witnessed a group of Tory MPs actually manhandle colleagues into voting with the government last night, which, is far beyond how a reasonable discussion should go. It really, also you had stories of, I heard that Liz Truss had been chasing MPs around the Commons to force them through the no lobby, which is just completely absurd and almost farcical, and I think demonstrates the extent to which discipline has entirely broken down. Obviously, after the sacking of Suella Braverman last night, that was when all of these things sort of fit together. You might think, losing the Home Secretary and the vote on fracking irrelevant, but once it's clear that Liz Truss has very little authority, she loses her base altogether.
Well, I was interested to ask about the base, because her base, the sort of group of MPs that she was more likely to be able to rely on than any other base, was the right of the party, the ERG. Now, because Suella has now gone, you got Lord Frost from the right of the party saying she should resign. He's not an MP, he's a peer. I can't see where her base of support now is. Am I being too downfall?
No, I think that's absolutely fair. I think that the problem is that actually the right of the party is more complicated than you might imagine. It feels as though the right of the party, there are actually two factions there. You've got the sort of libertarian, economic right-wingers, sort of Thatcherite economics, but who tend to be, as Liz Truss is herself, quite socially liberal, aren't too worried about migration numbers, for example, don't care about bringing down net migration, just want growth for the country. Then you've got the Suella Bravermans of the party, who are far more socially conservative and who, yes, want low taxes and a fundamentally, Thatcherite approach to tax, but tax may not be their top priority. And I think there was always a bit of a friction there. And I think by bringing Suella Braverman into the cabinet, Liz Truss was trying to mitigate against that. But obviously, that's all fallen apart now.
Yeah, and talking of one party speaking one voice and discipline, we're now learning that Downing Street has not denied reports that Liz Truss authorised the briefings against Sajid Javid and Michael Gove. Just to reiterate that the special advisor concerned or spokesman basically has been censured. And the language used for Sajid Javid was, pretty, should we say, straightforward. Indications, perhaps, that there are real tensions within the personalities, not just the policies here.
Definitely, and I think that it's worth mentioning that the team around Liz Truss are very young and inexperienced and have been thrown into this job. Don't quite know where they are, where they stand. Liz Truss, it seems, as you say, isn't denying authorising these briefings, and then the person who's actually briefing out gets censured. And it seems to be a little turning into a bit of a pattern of the Prime Minister authorising something, as she did with Kwasi Kwarteng in a bigger sense with the mini budget, and then sanctioning him for doing that. So I think there's always this problem that you get to. We saw it with Boris Johnson, we saw it with Theresa May, where you get to a point where Prime Ministers can't get people to come out and speak for them because they're too worried, these people, that they're just going to have to be embarrassed when there's a U-turn 5 minutes later.
So Suella Braverman went yesterday. She's replaced by Grant Shapps. How pivotal a figure is he to whether or not she survives?
Grant Shapps has very little loyalty to Liz Truss. He said a few days ago that she had 10 days to save her premiership or something along those lines, which I don't think is the word of a sort of close ally or friend. I think that Shapps's instalment in the Home Office adds to the sense that the Prime Minister is now a hostage of the sort of more Remainer wing of the party, if you like, the left of the party. So it doesn't seem as though he's there because Liz Truss is desperate, because perhaps she's getting pressure. Lots of MPs are suggesting that there's pressure on Liz Truss to have a sort of Huntite figure in the Home Office rather than Suella Braverman. So I don't think Shapps is going to help shore up Liz Truss's position. Really, there's very little love lost there.
Right, OK. Well, let's head back to John. John McTernan is still on the line with us. As we just updated, we've got both entrances or exits, as might be more appropriate at the moment, of number 10. Just to remind you that Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the influential 1922 Committee of Backbenchers, has gone into number 10. We are being told, at Liz Truss's request, but as Olivia was indicating, probably to try and gauge the mood in the Commons. Now, John, last night we saw these extraordinary scenes as they were going to go through the lobby to vote on this fracking issue, and questions as to whether or not it was a vote of confidence, even questions as to whether or not the whips resigned or was still in post. Now, I guess once MPs are no longer afraid of the whips, that's it. The government can't impose control on its own party.
Look, I think that's right. I think you have a situation where it's called a vote of no confidence. Then clearly they worried that they weren't going to get the numbers. So they said, no, it's not a vote of no confidence. And then the chief whip and the deputy chief whip said, sod this for a game of soldiers, and both resigned. So number 10 then decided after the vote, which they won, because the SNP abstained, after the vote, they could safely declare it actually retrospectively still a vote of no confidence. So the 40 or so MPs, Tory MPs who didn't support the government are now subject to discipline, and the chief whip and the deputy chief whip then unresigned. And farcically, it was actually 1:30 in the morning when journalists, I don't suppose, Tom, you got this, got a message on WhatsApp from number 10 saying actually it was a vote of no confidence. And nobody sends a WhatsApp to journalists at 1:30 in the morning unless the boss has gone bonkers, unless they've gone bonkers. Because you could do it at 7:30, couldn't you? Like, it's what's going on. Out of control is the issue, and yeah, you're absolutely right. Once people don't fear the whips, then how do you hold them? How do you hold the line on any votes? Because there's going to be votes on planning reform, there's going to be votes on benefits, there's going to be votes on cuts in spending. There's going to be so many votes coming up between now and Christmas, just to make the financial statement on October the 31st actually stack up. But That's why Liz Truss is still in there. She believes you need a prime minister if you can have a medium-term financial strategy, which is true. What's going to happen? But they want her out now, and this is the tension that's going on there. With we saw on the camera,
John,
Therese Coffey gun.
John, I know we have to lose you soon, so I just want to ask you this question because you have advised two prime ministers before. She will be sat in number 10. The people that she will spend the most time with right now are advisors performing the role that you have performed. Yeah. Imagine you're there. Yeah. Imagine you're her advisor. What are you saying?
I'd say, boss, we worked hard to get here. You worked hard to get here. But it's over. And the only thing we can do now is make sure that your leaving is dignified, that it's in the interests of the country, and that is something that is also done in a way that allows you to still have a public life, still allows you to go to the back bench and then decide what you do next. But we're talking now about how you leave, not if you leave.
OK, well, we'll let you answer all the emails coming in wanting your sage advice on that particular topic. John McTernan, thank you very much, of course, who's been in number 10 at these times of crisis. Let's just reflect that our cameras will stay on this front and back door because we got Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee, inside talking to Liz Truss. Will this be the day that she is told her time is up? A few minutes ago, our cameras then saw Therese Coffey, the Deputy Prime Minister, going in. Will she be the one giving that message that John McTernan was just reiterating there?
What do you think, Olivia?
Well, I think that, it's a matter, will it be today, which is what we're all asking. Well, if it's not, then it'll be very, very soon. I think what John mentioned there about the whipping operation breaking down is incredibly important. We saw yesterday that utter chaos when it wasn't clear whether or not the chief whip and her deputy had both resigned over the chaos that was taking place, which is an indication that the Prime Minister and Whip's office have just broken apart. Also, it's worth mentioning that in a normal situation, it should be the Chief Whip who's going into Downing Street now to talk to the Prime Minister, who should be the medium between the Prime Minister and Graham Brady. But obviously Liz Truss has almost no relationship left with her Chief Whip, and that, as John says, will make getting any legislation through impossible, which ultimately means, if not today, very soon.
And just to underline the importance of what happened last night, they were, we understand, quite close friends, her and the Chief Whip.
Yes, they were close friends, and she was a very close ally, has been supportive of Liz Truss throughout, but it just felt as though the Prime Minister was failing to get the confidence of our MPs. A very incompetent operation in number 10 is what I'm hearing. There are lots of Conservative MPs who are very frustrated about the number 10 personnel. You talked about personalities earlier, and it felt like communication had just completely broke down. So you had Wendy Morton furious. By this morning, it was clear that she had decided to remain in post. But if she's not doing anything like speaking to Graham Brady on behalf of Liz Truss, it feels like that relation is very febrile.
And
we're just getting a bit more from number 10, being reported by Press Association. They say there are no plans for Liz Truss to hold a news conference or to make any changes to her cabinet on Thursday. I don't know whether that means there'll be changes to her cabinet on Friday. The spokesman saying no plans for her to speak publicly or for any reshuffle at this time, close quotes.
Well, yes, they keep saying this. It doesn't seem to hold true for very long, so I wouldn't take much stock by what number 10 are actually putting out.
And we're sort of going through a number of, taking a number of steps. She may survive. It doesn't look good for her, but she's currently still under pressure. Now, if she does go, it is not clear who could unite this party, which is in open warfare. How do you get the show back on the road, even with a new leader?
Well, absolutely. Taking a few steps. First, it's worth reiterating the fact that we are in completely unprecedented times. a leader leaving this soon would strike a real blow at the heart of the Conservative Party, and there is no real mechanism to get rid of her. If she does go, I'm hearing that Conservative MPs would most like there to be some sort of coronation for the party to speak together and find someone who they're prepared to put their weight behind. But, as you say, a unity candidate is easier said than done. We've got to, there are many MPs who feel like in any fair contest that if the winner proves themselves unable to go forward, then the runner-up should take the role. It would be Rishi Sunak. But there are plenty of Penny Mordaunt supporters who don't really think that their woman is the right person for the job. She has conducted herself admirably, many feel, over the last few weeks. She's clearly still very ambitious herself. She wrote that piece in The Telegraph, which was a very thinly veiled, I would say, leadership bid. So it doesn't look at all certain that there could be a coronation, although Tory MPs are now saying that, yes, although they would like there to be a coronation, they would be prepared to have a leadership contest if it came to it.
Liam Halligan, our business editor, also joining us because there's been a bit of market reaction once more as to all this political uncertainty, pound down and gilt yields, or the government borrowing costs going back up.
Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty, to be honest with you. What markets don't like is a lack of clarity and a sense that Britain is descending into becoming somewhere that's, for a while at least, is ungovernable. It does seem, 4 chancellors in as many months, Home Secretary out on her ear, and now a change of government with, as Gloria rightly says, no sense of the Tory party coming together. It strikes me, if and when Liz Truss does go, maybe we should even say as and when, as opposed to if and when, there will be some kind of coronation, maybe a combination of Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt. I was with David Frost last night.
Lord Frost,
who is, of course, a sort of purported kingmaker within the Conservative Party, very influential on the backbenches and across the party as a whole. And he was saying, even though he backed Liz Truss, he thought there'd be some kind of coming together of Mordaunt and bringing Sunak in. And I think the markets, for now at least, would like that, because Sunak is seen to be somebody who would talk tougher about making spending cuts and trying to address a sense that fiscal policy is too expansionary.
But Jeremy Hunt would have to stay in position as Chancellor. They couldn't afford to change that again. The October 31st fiscal statement, the tax spending plans and the OBR, all that would have to stay in place, because that really would spook the markets if that went derailed.
I don't see a reason to change that. It's pretty comical, isn't it, that they chose Halloween? But anyway, it's a headline writer's dream. It would probably be... What would have to happen very quickly is there would have to be a joining together of the various factions, and it's completely factionalised, of the parliamentary party. And I think, unless this is sorted out very, very quickly, we're already beyond the point where it's a farce, but unless it's sorted out very, very quickly, I think a lot of the public will find it very difficult to forgive a Conservative Party for engaging in what are these political parlour games, these kind of internal wars about who has the most prestigious job, at a time when the nights are drawing in, inflation is high and rising, and people are concerned about making ends meet.
And Liam, I think you may have had the last interview with Kwasi Kwarteng as Chancellor. You secured...
And I've been in touch with him since.
You secured that interview for GB News. My next question, which you have just answered, when you're a politician, a Prime Minister, who fires their closest ally, they are then on the backbenches. He's not given a resignation speech.
No.
How is he, without breaking any confidences, and will he be fighting for his former close mate and colleague on those backbenches now?
It's difficult to say. I mean, you'll know, Gloria, and some viewers and listeners may find it strange, but when you're engaged in reporting, you do end up getting to know politicians, and I'm not ashamed of that. That's part of our job, is to get to know people, to know what makes them tick. Of course, you report fairly without fear or favour when there are things to report. So I thought compare the tone of his resignation letter with the tone of Suella Braverman's resignation letter. I mean, reading Kwasi Kwarteng's resignation letter, there might have been the most delicate barb in there, but it was overwhelmingly emollient and sure-footed. Suella Braverman's resignation letter was much more spiky and punchy. Kwasi Kwarteng, of course, did abstain last night in that key vote, but then the Prime Minister herself ended up abstaining because there was sort of such
chasing the chief whip,
physical chaos going on that she went through the wrong door or something. It's sort of vaudeville. I don't think Kwasi Kwarteng, I know him quite well. He's a pretty. He doesn't get excited easily, and I think personally he is okay, though of course he's massively bruised and wounded, but politics is a contact sport, that's the way it goes. But I can't see him being at the front line of any plot to change of the guard, not least because the Hunt-Sunak consortium wouldn't want him because he embodies the mini-budget, and they're trying to say the mini-budget was a problem.
Well, and the Bank of England now having gone public saying that they weren't even consulted about the mini-budget before it actually went public. And obviously that they're saying was a mistake in terms of the communication and the way it was all presented, which you've touched on.
Yeah, I mean, that's what they say. Yeah. I don't know. What I do know is that the Bank of England completely wrong-footed financial markets by raising rates by less than was expected, and that is when history shows that is when borrowing costs started to spike.
Yeah. Well, look, let's just update you with the fact that Catherine's arrived in number 10, or outside number 10 for us at the moment. That would be something you're going through the front door.
I wouldn't rule it out.
Yeah, exactly. Catherine, just to let people know that there you go. You're not too far in case you are needed to step in as an interim Prime Minister. But we've also got the cameras on the back door as well, in case we see some Graham Brady or Therese Coffey scuttle out. What's the sense of drama there at number 10? Presumably all the reporters have arrived now.
Yes, I was here from 7 o'clock this morning, just a few of us, but now there is a massive bank of cameras, reporters from all over the world. I was next to somebody from CNN, Arabian television to the left, a huge interest and a feeling that something major is underfoot. We have moved on, haven't we, since the incredible events of last night, from the can she survive, is it recoverable, to how long can she survive and when might the end come for her premiership, which is, of course, only 6.5 weeks old. It seems barely believable. Politics seems to be moving at warp speed. So we do know that in the last hour or so, chair of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady, who is the man in these situations. He would be the one to tell the Prime Minister when the game is up. He is the only person who knows how many letters of no confidence have actually been submitted to him. We know that the number of MPs that's gone public has gone up and up and up. He is in Downing Street as we speak. He entered via the back door. Not many people, apart from the Environment Secretary, Ranil Jayawardena, coming in and out of the front, understandably. We also understand that the Deputy Prime Minister, Therese Coffey, went in again via the back door. That's in the last 15 minutes or so. So the Prime Minister apparently has asked for this meeting with Sir Graham Brady. We are told that they are testing the temperature, that they have been speaking every day, but clearly concern is mounting about what will happen next, because frankly, it was utter chaos last night. It's only 24 hours since I was sitting in the studio with you, and we were saying that Liz Truss seemed to have had a pretty decent Prime Minister's questions. Things several hours later then descended rapidly into really an atrocious situation, both for the Prime Minister and more broadly the Conservative Party. First with the resignation stroke sacking of the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, the letter very pointedly criticising the Prime Minister and the approach of trying to pretend you haven't made mistakes and getting on and expecting people not to notice. Obviously, a massive row was reported about immigration. The Prime Minister's spokesman, speaking to journalists in the last half hour, has refused to confirm that the government is still committed to the manifesto pledge of lowering net migration. We do know that Liz Truss was hoping to increase migration to fill skills shortages, to try to turbocharge the economy. Also, Prime Minister's spokesman saying that she will not be making any press conference today, that there are no further reshuffles expected. Of course, things can change very fast, as we have seen. But now all attention really is turning to what will happen when, and it seems to be a when rather than an if, it is announced that the Prime Minister is going to stand down. Now, what the Conservative Party really need, and what it is agreed that they need to get in order behind the scenes, is a plan for who will succeed her, because clearly Labour are calling for a general election. They very successfully yesterday with the no confidence motion, the vote on fracking.
Catherine, I'm just going to interrupt. We're just getting a bit more from inside Downing Street behind you there. A source saying Liz Truss had invited Sir Graham Brady to number 10 as part of a taking the temperature exercise to gauge the mood of Tory MPs. I mean, what is the temperature of those MPs?
Boiling, I would say, boiling. But the thing is, although there is huge anger over the scenes last night, MPs being manhandled, an investigation being launched.
Can I ask you about that?
Apparently crying.
Catherine, can I ask you about that?
Yes.
Because lots of people are suggesting this is not a functioning government, but it is not a functioning party. And I just wanted to interrupt you because you were talking about this point. Government whips, this is just been announced in that lobby briefing, the Downing Street briefing to political journalists. Government whips are still, I'm quoting from the spokesperson for the Prime Minister, still considering what action to take against Tory MPs who abstained in that chaotic vote last night. Now, that vote is now, let me try and do my math, about 16 hours ago that vote took place, 7 o'clock last night. I mean, how can they still be considering? Doesn't that suggest they don't have the power to take any action against their MPs who are defying a 3-line whip? Is there a different interpretation on that?
I think that's exactly right. I think it speaks to the dysfunction and the chaos, frankly, that is now existing at the heart of government. Bear with me, just seeing who's getting out of the car. Everybody pretending not to hear the journalists, of course. Where were we? Yes. The fact that first it was a confidence vote, then the message got round that it wasn't a confidence vote. There was a huge amount of confusion. Then they couldn't even tell if the Deputy Chief Whip or the Chief Whip indeed was still in post. The Business Secretary, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on television last night, pretty much not knowing who was in office and who wasn't. Reports of the Deputy Chief Whip saying, I effing don't care and I've had enough and all this, and then confirmation they were still in position. Then at 1:30 in the morning, a missive from the Prime Minister's spokesman saying it was a confidence vote, that was very clear despite the miscommunication, and that appropriate disciplinary action would be taken. Then another minister on broadcast this morning saying, no, it wasn't. I mean, it really is beyond belief. And of course, the problem they now have, they've got a list of about 36 MPs that did not vote with the government. That included the very recently now ex-Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng, people like David Davis as well. What do they do? If they follow through on their threat, which was to remove the whip, are they really going to chuck 36 MPs out of the Conservative Party at a moment like this. Boris Johnson did it, of course, with a couple of dozen, but this situation seems to be much more febrile than that. And again, if they backtrack now, don't they look weak? Surely the Prime Minister's authority even further undermined. But I mean, it has to be said at the moment, she really appears to have almost no authority at all.
The other thing that's emerged this morning, Catherine, from all these briefings that have been going on at Downing Street, is that the Prime Minister's official spokesman did not deny reports that Liz Truss authorised these briefings against Sajid Javid and Michael Gove, not refuting the Times report that she'd authorised one of her closest aides to accuse Michael Gove of being, quote, a sadist.
Yes, and that is also quite extraordinary, isn't it? There were these deeply unpleasant comments about Michael Gove only a couple of weeks ago, followed last Sunday by reports that Sajid Javid, former Chancellor, that she'd said she'd laughed at the idea that he could take over from Kwasi Kwarteng, even though it was reported that they had been reaching out to him back at Conservative Party conference as a possible replacement. They'd said that they know who's good and who's SH asterisk asterisk. Now, yesterday, Jason Stein, who's her head of comms, was sacrificed. He was suspected to be the person that had said that. Sajid Javid was due to have a question in Prime Minister's questions yesterday and was threatening to really let rip. In the end, he didn't appear. The question was withdrawn. We are told that was because Jason Stein was fired. But now, you know, do all roads indeed lead back to the Prime Minister? She really is in quite an unimaginable position now. Obviously, many people will say this is of her own making. She didn't have the support of Conservative MPs in the beginning. Frankly, less than a third of them had voted for her, and then she didn't help herself by surrounding herself with the people that had supported her and leaving most other people out in the cold. Now, obviously, she's learned lessons since then. She's brought in Jeremy Hunt, who had supported Rishi Sunak. He is now, of course, Chancellor as of last Friday. And then, astonishingly, last night, she replaced the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, with Grant Shapps. Now, he was Transport Secretary under Boris Johnson, and she fired him. She said he'd been one of the most competent people in government, but she wouldn't keep him because he backed Rishi Sunak. That was only 6 weeks ago. Fast forward to yesterday, she appoints him as the new Home Secretary. Now, it's widely reported that he has been very actively plotting, along with his £1,600 smartphone on which he's got a spreadsheet of hundreds of conversations with MPs, actively working to remove Liz Truss. And yet here we are, Grant Shapps is Home Secretary and Jeremy Hunt is Chancellor. Very real questions over who is in charge, if anybody. And Rishi Sunak, many people will say, has been vindicated. What he said would come to pass if Liz Truss followed the plans that she outlined during the leadership campaign have proved to be true. And many people will be wondering, well, why don't we just bring in Rishi Sunak? But of course, he's very divisive. I was speaking to one of Liz Truss's most passionate supporters today, who's normally very cheery. He was telling me even he was feeling that it was bleak. Even he thought that the game might be up. He wanted MPs to calm down. He wanted them to bring back Boris. Well, certainly lots of Conservative members would like that. I honestly think there is almost zero chance the Conservative Party has just got rid of Boris Johnson. How could they possibly bring him back at this point? But it's incredibly difficult to see how they go from here. The markets clearly would be calmed by Rishi Sunak. I think we can safely say he would bring back financial stability. But the Conservative Party, many of them really hate him. And how is any one person going to bring this rabble, as it seems at the moment, of the Conservative Party back together? Is there any one person? And can they agree amongst themselves on somebody to take over? Because before they get rid of Liz Truss, they really have to get that person in position, because otherwise there seems to be a real risk that the government could collapse. And the last thing that they want, clearly, is a general election.
Catherine, we will talk to you throughout the day. You are outside the building, which is at the centre of the action for sure. Thank you. Liam, I want to bring you back in, if I may. Now, of course, policy decisions still have to be taken. There is still a government. Liz Truss is still the Prime Minister. Is immigration going to take centre stage? The question of whether we have more or less immigration and the politics and the economics potentially coming into conflict on that issue.
Well, this really was the flashpoint between Suella Braverman, of course, and Liz Truss. Going back to that Suella Braverman resignation letter, amidst the platitudes, well, actually, there are no platitudes. She says it's important that governments keep to their manifesto commitments, and she actually singles out immigration. The centre of the row was, again, the economy's stupid, as they say. Liz Truss and her aides in 10 Downing Street wanted to put forward to the OBR an argument, the Office of Budget Responsibility, that by allowing more immigration, more visas, particularly for agricultural workers and so on, other service sector workers as well, that would boost growth. Because we've got lots of vacancies in the UK. If we could fill some of these vacancies, you get more economic activity. And Suella Braverman simply wasn't having that. She said, we've already issued upward of 1 million visas this year anyway, albeit some of them temporary. And this breaks a key 2019 manifesto pledge upon which I was elected. The trouble Liz Truss has got is that she needs the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, to indicate there will be economic growth to make her sums add up. During that assessment on Halloween Day, as Mark was saying. On the other hand, Suella Braverman really is very popular among the Tory grassroots. She got by far the longest standing ovation at the Tory party conference just a few short weeks ago. It seems like 10 years ago. Yeah. And this is the flashpoint. It's about the economy and immigration, and I think a lot of the Conservative grassroots activists will rally around Suella Braverman and around this issue. Yeah, and obviously a bit of a cheerleader for the right of the party. Olivia, we're just getting a bit more about what might be going on inside Number 10 with the news that Jake Berry, the Conservative Party chairman, has also arrived. So you've got the 1922 committee chairman and the party chairman in there.
And the deputy,
you've got
Prime
the
Prime
Minister.
I
wonder
what
they
might
be talking about.
It does feel as though this is getting to crunch point. We've also got Jill Mortimer, who's quite an influential 2019 intake. Red Wall MP has just publicly called for Liz Truss to go Hartlepool. Yep.
Goodness me, she won that in a by-election. That shock by-election win.
Shock by-election.
Is that Peter Mandelson's old seat?
The fighter and not a quitter.
First Conservative MP in 50
phrase.
years. And you also have Miriam Cates. You've got quite a few.
We're now at
Red Wall
15.
MPs.
The tally is now at 15 Tory MPs
publicly declared, and obviously many, many more privately.
Do these people have anything in common? Are they, some people describe MPs as the usual suspects, or they say they're from the right of the party, or they say they're from the left of the party. Does anything unite these 15 MPs?
I think what's quite interesting is, no, not really. I think that you've obviously got this breakdown of Boris Johnson was specifically very popular in the Red Wall. He had that personal appeal and he managed to sort of get together this coalition. It was possible to kind of gloss over the huge ideological differences in sort of former Red Wall Labour voters and kind of shire Tories. Boris Johnson, with his personal charisma, glossed over all of that and managed to get them on side. As soon as he had gone, it was always going to be very difficult to keep that Red Wall coalition together. They are turning their backs on Liz Truss, but it isn't only them. No. You've got people from the left, you've got people from the right, you've got people from the left of the party who are pleased to have Jeremy Hunt and Grant Shapps in place, but are embarrassed by the chaos that's going on. And then you've obviously got people from the right libertarian wing of the party who feel as though Liz Truss has completely betrayed everything that she stood for in that leadership election when she fired Kwasi Kwarteng.
Yeah, I mean, Steve Double and Cheryl Murray, who've gone public from Cornwall, and, you know, one wonders about the inroads the Lib Dems might be, or the sort of difference of political persuasion down there. And, as you say, the Red Wall as well. But it does look now as if it's, as you're saying, across the divide. It's no longer the old Sunak camp who are trying to make mischief.
No, and nor is it simply... At the weekend, it was it was people like Andrew Bridgen, who has called for the last 4 prime ministers to go, and Crispin Blunt, who's always a bit of a rogue personality. Now you've got far more sort of mainstream MPs coming in, and as you say, you've got those who are getting pressure in their constituency from the Lib Dems down in the southwest, and you've got the MPs who are getting pressure from their constituents in the Red Wall, and generally a sense of embarrassment. It's not just about the policies or politics anymore, it's a general sense of total incompetence.
It's 1 o'clock, you're watching GB Newsday. Let's just explain to you that this is the picture at the rear of Downing Street, where at the moment we understand that the chairman of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady, representing the backbenchers, Jake Berry, the party chairman, and the Deputy Prime Minister, Therese Coffey, are all meeting the Prime Minister. So the question is this the day that Liz Truss realises the game is up?
There are now 15 Conservative MPs who have publicly called on her to go. Jill Mortimer, the MP for Hartlepool, she won that seat from Labour in a by-election. It was a historic Conservative gain. She has written and posted the letter that she has sent to Graham Brady on social media. It is, Dear Sir Graham, it is with deep regret I write to inform you that I have no confidence in the competence of the current Prime Minister, Liz Truss. I would therefore like to add my support to the call for a vote of no confidence.
Let's speak to political commentator Benedict Spence joining us now, who's following these events. Benedict, it does seem that this is one of the occasions where you sort of reach this critical mass where events overtake the personalities.
It does seem so, yes. I'm slightly irritated. I was on GB News on Friday last week, and backstage somebody asked me, how long do you think she has left? And I said, well, she's given us 6 good weeks. I'd venture another 6 days would be good. And now here we are 6 days later, and things seem to be escalating slightly. But, you know, we had the furore yesterday in the Commons, very unedifying, MPs coming out and speaking to the national broadcast media, leaving it in no uncertain terms how a lot of them felt. And admittedly, as Olivia points out, a number of the people calling for the Prime Minister to go are members of what you might call the traditional sort of awkward squad, people who are often very, prickly when it comes to the authority of their Prime Minister, and among the first ones to sort of stick the knife in. But unquestionably, I think we've all known actually for about a week that she has no authority left, and that it was just a matter of when, not if, and things do seem to be coming to a head.
Don't know is the timeline for this. In your opinion, how long does she have in the job?
Oh, honestly, this is the problem, because ultimately I don't think anybody really knows, not even Sir Graham Brady, not even members of the Conservative Party. It's all a question of trying to thrash out a process by which you can have a unity candidate. And of course, a lot of MPs are saying, but there just isn't a unity candidate. You can find fault with almost all of them, and then find a way of packaging that and presenting it to the public that doesn't actually make it look as if it's a bit of a stitch-up. We do need to remember that, Liz Truss was, although not elected by the public, she was elected by the members. But right now, does the party actually have the time to conduct another leadership contest? What with everything that's going on? We had all throughout the summer people saying this winter is going to be very difficult. Well, winter is upon us now, and we find ourselves once again in upheaval with no functioning Prime Minister. But let's say that somebody like Jeremy Hunt is installed as Chancellor and somebody else replaces the Prime Minister, and there isn't a proper due process. How do you sell that to the electorate? How actually do you sell it to, even if they last another 2 years before the next general election? You can just tell the Labour Party will attack them again and again and again along those lines of the Tories not respecting democracy, appointing who it is that they want rather than actually following a democratic process. Even if they were able to turn around the economic mess that we find ourselves in, those accusations will follow them all the way to the next general election. And that's why, managing this is incredibly delicate.
OK, Benedict, thank you for that. We'll keep our cameras on the front and back door and see who leaves and who arrives. It might be a bit of a shock if Penny Mordaunt or, as you say, Rishi Sunak turns up, but we'll keep our cameras on there. For the moment, Benedict, thank you for that.
Olivia, just yesterday, the Prime Minister stood at Prime Minister's question time. Everyone was waiting to see how she would perform, whether she would survive. She did. She repeated, I am a fighter, not a quitter. Is it her decision?
Well, I think that it truly is extraordinary, because 24 hours ago, the feeling in Westminster was very much that momentum had actually gone out of the sails a little bit. So I'm mixing my metaphors there, but wind had gone out of the sails of the rebels who were sticking the knife into Liz Truss. It felt as though if she just managed to get through Prime Minister's questions, then she could at least hang on until the fiscal statement, probably through to Christmas, and then it was sort of anybody's game. She did hang on through Prime Minister's questions, but all she had to do then, it felt, was sort of keep her head down. Instead, what she did was fire her Home Secretary, who was shoring her up, because, as we've discussed, Suella Braverman held the key to the sort of social right of the Conservative Party. And then she decided to make this vote on fracking last night a vote in confidence of the government. Then she sort of, it seemed, couldn't quite decide if it should be a vote in confidence of the government, because they were briefed that about 40 MPs were going to vote against her, and she couldn't fire all of them. So basically, she allowed this sort of chaos to spiral out of control. And now we are where we are.
Let's speak now to Nigel Nelson, the political editor at the Sunday Mirror, who's joining us. And Nigel, we remember it was questions about the government's economic competence that was dogging them. But is it now perhaps the question of political competence that's really going to do for them?
Yes, I mean, what you just heard is that they're in complete chaos. We seem to be run by sort of headless chickens at the moment, and obviously something needs to be done. Now, quite clearly what's going on at the moment is a serious meeting. If you've got Graham Brady in there, the Deputy Prime Minister, and the party chairman, they're obviously deciding what next moves are. Now, what Number 10 sources are saying is this was a meeting called by Liz Truss rather than Graham Brady asking to see her. So she obviously is now considering her position, deciding whether she actually wants to quit now, or whether she wants to keep what she said only 24 hours ago, that she's a fighter, not a quitter. But either way, she's going to be going. The real problem, I think, is that the way that the Tory MPs saw it is they had to have a candidate in place before the present Prime Minister disappears. And of course, as Olivia and Catherine have just said, there is no unity candidate that they've got.
And what a terrible decision that Tory MPs have to take, to keep a Prime Minister without authority, or to change, to give the country its third Prime Minister within a year. Both equally absurd. There is no good option here.
No, I mean, all they're trying to do is work out the least worst option. And the ideal, well, not the ideal, the best they can do from their point of view is that they have a candidate in place. The MPs can all agree who that person is, which means they can avoid a leadership election and going back to the party membership. Now, the problem there is, as an MP said this morning, there are too many egos around who are all sort of vying for the top job. And that's going to be difficult. So if they're going to keep the party membership out of this, what they'll have to do is change the rules so MPs will have their own leadership election and decide who takes over. Now, the 172,000 members will be absolutely furious about this. And one of the fears from MPs is that they'll basically go on strike. And so if there is a general election, there'll be no one around to go canvassing or to deliver leaflets for them. I mean, that puts the party in a terrible position. Then again, of course, it's what MPs really desperately need to do is avoid an election. According to the latest polls, you'd end up with just 48 Tory MPs left if there was one tomorrow. And that means they wouldn't even be the official opposition. The SNP would take over.
Let's just break away for another bit of breaking news coming through, sort of noises off, if you like. Channel 4 has confirmed that they're taking their news presenter, Krishnan Gurumurthy, off air for a week. It follows what's been... well, it's just a bit of movement, some arrivals at Number 10. We'll... check on who's coming and going. But
there's so many staffers in that building.
Yeah,
that's what we
I think
don't realise.
it's the rear entrance that's going to be the important one, so we'll keep our camera up there. Anyway, just to confirm that you remember he had what was termed a robust interview with Steve Baker, the Northern Ireland Secretary, and following that, a four-letter word was used by Krishnan. He thought he was off air, and as a result of that, the Tory party demanded that he be sacked. That's not happened, but he has now been taken off air for a week.
Just to be clear, Mark, Krishnan was off air when he used that word. It was just...
He was picked up by the microphones, wasn't it?
But it was
common
not
feed.
It was not broadcast, the word that he used. He has issued a full apology, and Steve Baker has
accepted it.
He said, "Great." He said, "I'm very grateful for Krishna's apology," but the word was not actually broadcast. It was recorded on a feed that broadcasters use to record events, but it was not. It did not actually go to air. It's just important to say that.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously said, well, it was not, this is Christian himself, while it was not broadcast, that word in any context is beneath the standards I set myself. I apologise unreservedly. And indeed, Steve Baker said, I appreciate you apologising.
Quite a gracious exchange.
Well, I know. So
one
wonders
from
actually,
both people, I would say.
why Channel 4 have, well, I've obviously got a code of conduct. But anyway, that's that.
We're on Downing Street. We're looking at the pictures of Downing Street. We know the Deputy Prime Minister is in there with the Prime Minister and the Conservative chair, and also the chairman of the 1922 committee. That's the chair of the representative of backbench MPs. Nigel Nelson, who's political editor at the Sunday Mirror, is with us. But first, before we go back to him, I want to go to our political reporter, Olivia.
Yeah, so we've got a situation here where you've got frustration across the whole party with the chaos, partly because of the bandwidth that this chaos is now taking up. You've got very important things happening now in the Commons. Obviously, the situation in Russia and Ukraine is getting very scary, and it's getting very scary for people in the West and in Europe because energy supplies are seriously at risk. You've got these NHS pressures getting bigger and bigger. We're getting properly into the winter now. The cost of living crisis is really, really biting. And there's a feeling among MPs that their constituents are asking them to help out in various ways. And they're not able to do that because they're so caught up with this soap opera going on in Westminster, which I think, as you asked earlier, what is it that links some of these MPs together? And perhaps if there is a link, you notice quite a lot of these MPs are representing quite poor constituencies where people have serious concerns about how they are going to get through the winter. Hartlepool is a good example, but there are others. And I think that's what MPs are finding particularly frustrating. I spoke to an MP last night who hasn't actually yet called for Liz Truss to go, but did say that he finds this whole thing very embarrassing. He was apologising and asking to sort of pass on that apology to viewers and listeners.
And of course, we remember that Liz Truss at PMQs yesterday was time and time again saying that they had taken action by this energy support package without perhaps acknowledging that, that was for 2 years and suddenly back to 6 months, which a lot of people will be rather concerned with.
We have just got another Conservative MP, the Conservative Ruth Edwards. This is sorry, I'm looking at you. This is new.
This is brand new.
This is brand new.
Yes.
Yeah, has told Liz Truss to, I quote, step aside, go and let someone who is up to the task become Prime Minister. That is the MP for Rushcliffe in Nottinghamshire. She wrote that on the Conservative Home website.
Another line actually coming in on that, she is also confirming that the Chief Whip, Wendy Morton, had in fact resigned during this chaos last night in the Commons. Ruth Edwards saying, I walked up to the Chief Whip to try to clarify what was going on. She cut me off mid-sentence. I don't have to talk to you. I've resigned. Ruth Edwards reporting.
I'll tell you what's interesting about that. Rushcliffe, of course, is Ken Clarke's old constituency in Nottinghamshire. It's a relatively affluent constituency. What a contrast with Hartlepool, which is, core Red Wall ex-Labour constituency. That speaks to Olivia's point that this is now coming from all parts of the Conservative Party.
I just want to go back to Nigel Nelson, the political editor at the Sunday Mirror. You are a veteran of Westminster. You have been reporting on politics in Westminster for decades. Have you ever seen anything like what we are witnessing at the moment?
No, this is an absolute first, even after all that time. The nearest thing that I can think that came to this that I witnessed was the fall of Margaret Thatcher. But even that was done in a less chaotic and more considered way. This seems to be just everybody is in a blind panic, whether it's the government, whether it's the Conservative Party, whether it's MPs. is that no one seems to be at all sure what to do, which is why that the only way forward, as far as I can see, the way things are moving, is for Liz Truss to do, in effect, a preemptive strike and actually announce her resignation rather than be dragged out kicking and screaming.
Nigel, thank you for giving us that historical perspective. Thank you for your time, as you always provide brilliant insights. Thank you, Nigel Nelson, for now. Joined now in this studio by Charlie Rowley, who is a former advisor to Michael Gove. Is the game up for Liz Truss, in your view?
There'll be lots of commentary and people going to Twitter and saying that it is. I don't think it has to be, but you can't get out of it. It's not a good day when you've got 14 of your backbench MPs. 15 now. Forgive me.
17. I'm rising.
Forgive me. Clearly it's a fast-moving situation, and it's not a position that anybody wants to be in. But I think there is a way out, and the reason I say that is because, for the reasons that I think Nigel was just saying, that there is no replacement. And if you want to separate the two issues, I think yesterday, on its own, seemed a chaotic day, losing your Home Secretary. But
Olivia's just... I'm going to let Olivia alert us to what it has been rumoured.
Well, it's rumoured that there's going to be a statement from Downing Street in 15 minutes' time. So
right, and
perhaps...
we've got a car arrived at the back there of Downing Street at the rear entrance, which looks like one of the official sort of Range Rovers with the bulletproof glass and so on. Just to pick up on something we had, Charlie, on your former boss, Michael Gove, Downing Street not denying that Liz Truss had authorised briefings against both Sajid Javid and Michael Gove. And we remember the Times report where she had authorised, it said, one of her closest aides to accuse Michael Gove of being a sadist. So is this not just about policy and economic credibility and so on? It is about the way that she has handled the people within her own government.
I think that is a fair point, and I think Downing Street, after the debacle of the mini-budget, there was going to be a new approach from Number 10 to say that we're going on a charm offensive. Now, in those headlines, it seemed more offence than it did charm, and I think it's absolutely right that the individual who has been accused of that has been suspended, and I think Number 10 will be looking into that. Jason Stein, yeah, absolutely. So that will be looked into, and I think it was clearly in Liz's interest to want to reach out to backbench MPs to try and bring the party together. Now, obviously, those headlines haven't helped, but action has been taken, and we must see what happens after that.
So, Charlie, you're a former government advisor. The door that we see in our screen, Number 10, is packed full of advisors right now. It's a very big building in there. There are an awful lot of staff. What would you be saying to Liz Truss if you were advising her right now?
Well, there are two schools of thought, and I think on the back of the announcement that's going to be made, we could see one of two things. You could see if the Prime Minister really thinks that she can't command the confidence of her own MPs, that she will take matters into her own hands and she will take the decisive action to go out there and say that I think I can't support my MPs and the game is up. The alternative is to explain the events of yesterday, apologise again that what was a process of voting in Parliament, which clearly cannot happen again, and whatever happened, miscommunication between Number 10, the whips, parliamentary colleagues, it was a total mess, and everybody accepts that. But the reality is you can say, look, that process will be conducted properly, effectively going forward. What matters to real people in this country? It's getting people's mortgage rates under control. It's getting the economy moving. It's getting the backlogs in the NHS sorted. I'm determined to carry on and do that. I want parliamentary colleagues to support me in that. Apologise again for yesterday's mistakes, but reiterate that you've got a new Chancellor in place, we have a new Home Secretary, and things are going to get better.
We've just got another ministerial Jaguar arriving. I mean, one has to reflect that their vehicles are coming and going all the time, but this is particularly pertinent today because we have all the big hitters in Number 10. Just to remind you, we have Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 Backbench Committee. We have the chair of the Tory party. We have the Deputy Prime Minister, all in. And Olivia, you were indicating that we are going to get some kind of official word, because we were told earlier there would be no press statements today.
Yeah, they seem to have gone back on that.
Well, there's a surprise.
Yes, there is going to be some sort of a statement from Liz Truss herself in less than 15 minutes' time. So we might not have long yet
Right,
to
but
speculate.
no dais coming out as we normally see with these things outside number 10, the front door. So would this be, one assumes, to perhaps the lobby correspondence inside number 10?
No.
It sounds
the
like
Prime
it's
Minister,
going to be
if it is a
public statement.
And it is only one source, one news organisation reporting this. The Press Association reporting that news organisation is reporting it.
There are now ITV
multiple
is saying
sources. There are multiple sources. Olivia is ahead of me, as she no doubt will be.
Okay, so I think we're on dais watch, aren't we? Is the dais going to come out of that front door?
In 9 minutes' time or thereabouts, we expect to hear from the Prime Minister. We do not know what she will say. As Charlie, former advisor to Michael Gove, was indicating, she can either tell us that the game is up, or she can say she isn't going anywhere and she's going to fight for people to help them get through a very difficult period in the cost of living crisis. We do not know what the Prime Minister will say, but Liam, this is getting tense.
It is, and sorry to sound sort of mercenary and about this, but the market seem to like the prospect that she's about to go, with government borrowing costs coming down and the pound...
Because they've gone up this morning
going up. The sense that at least the boil will be lanced. Again, a very unfortunate turn of phrase, but under the circumstances, this is a very unfortunate situation. It all depends what then happens to borrowing costs, mortgage rates and so on, sterling. And if sterling comes down a lot, that increases inflation, of course, because imports get more expensive. That then depends on the after party, if you like, what happens if there's some kind of coalition that looks like...
There is the dais. We've also got police outriders now arriving at the back of number 10, which normally accompany the Prime Ministerial saloon or Range Rover.
We have seen Theresa May stand at that podium. We have seen Boris Johnson stand up at that podium. We do not know what she is going to say, but the history of the podium and Prime Ministerial statements from it, we know that it is party-related.
I'm trying to remember.
No, it's
something about whether the logo...
It does. It has the crown and it has the lion and the unicorn, which means it's government-related.
Thank you, Liam.
Related.
Exactly. If it doesn't have the logo on, then it's usually calling a general election, I think.
Yeah.
So you dissolve Parliament, you'll be up. It's a party political statement without the logo.
This is clearly a government statement.
Right.
And I think it's worth... We don't know what's going to happen, but... Yeah, let's just be a little bit humane here and
think to our cameraman. There we are. You got it right.
Think about what the Prime Minister is going through personally, what her family's going through, what her children are going through. Politics is a contact sport in a vibrant democracy. It's the worst possible way of running a country, except, as Winston Churchill says, for all the others.
Could that have been avoided if she had basically gone with the MPs voting her in or out rather than the party membership? Would this have been avoided?
Well, I think it could have been avoided even without that, because I think if you'd recognised from the start that you might not have had all of your colleagues behind you, but you'd won by the membership, when you then assembled your cabinet and your team for the first time, it could have been a much broader church. Now, Liz chose not to do that, and that, I think, didn't go down so well with parliamentary colleagues, but they gave her a chance still. But a series of unforced errors have taken place, but it looks like there may be some more news coming in.
I want to follow up on actually what Liam said about the sort of human nature of events today, the incredible pressure that the Prime Minister has been under. Now, I got elected at the same time as Liz Truss, clearly different parties. I don't know her that well. Do you know her, Charlie? Can you tell us, give us some insight into her character?
Well, I had one meeting with her when I was... It was funny enough at a Conservative Party conference. I think it went back to 2014 when she was the DEFRA secretary. And there's always a graveyard shift, as it's known, when you have to stay behind at the end of conference and summarise to the media what's happened.
Graveyard maybe being the pertinent term at this particular time.
Well, she was... but she took it in good spirits, and she did the media round and was very jolly. I think what people think about Liz is that she's fun. You know, we know Fizz with Liz was a thing to engage with colleagues. We know she likes a night out karaoke. She's a fun person.
I know Liz Truss quite well. I've had, one-on-one meetings with her on several occasions, both social and professional. I found her to be an extremely analytically shrewd Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and I know most Chief Secretaries to the Treasury over the years. Very, very numerate person. Better in small groups than on television. She has got an electricity about her when she's with small groups. Reminded me a lot, actually, from a different neck of the political woods, of Gordon Brown, who, as I'm sure Gloria would attest, is a really big, charismatic person in a small group, but again, can't really do it on television, which is so important in modern politics.
Let's bring Tom Harwood in, our political correspondent, because, Tom, they're clearly making sure that Lecton is wired up and that it's good to go. We've also seen police outriders at the back of number 10, which normally accompany a prime ministerial motorcade. This is about to be quite serious, we think.
Yes, it looks like we really are in the most extraordinary end times. The big question on everyone's lips, however, are what on earth is next? How on earth can this premiership end today without knowing what's going to replace it tomorrow? Now, of course, it is ordinary when a Prime Minister resigns, if, of course, that's what this statement in just a few moments' time is going to be, that a date would be set for the future for a process to then take place, a leadership election, to find that replacement. However, we know that the last leadership election, lasting the many months that it did, caused profound uncertainty and drift within the government of the United Kingdom. We also know that the Conservative Party is frankly bitterly divided, at war with itself. Would a leadership election be able to heal those rifts, especially one that would cut out the membership in terms of what everyone were to expect? I mean, there's such a great deal of uncertainty that would come about from a certain decision today. Really, lots of people not knowing what the next few days look like, if, of course, the Prime Minister is going to announce that she will be one of the shortest-serving, if not the shortest-serving Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. 45 days in office, 77 days away from being the second shortest-serving Prime Minister. It's hard to overstate the magnitude of events today.
The alternative, of course, though, Tom, would be that they'd have to go to the country. And as we were discussing earlier, some of these polls, and they are snap polls, would suggest that the Tories would lose some 200 seats. They wouldn't even be effective in opposition.
Yes, the Labour Party today saying, in their words, it's time for leadership, demanding a general election now. Although it's frankly very, very hard to see what sane Conservative leader would say that an election would be the right thing to do. It would be, frankly, electoral suicide for the Conservative Party now. And let's not forget, there are 2 years left to run in this Parliament. If this Prime Minister, or indeed whoever may replace her in the fullness of time, so chooses, this Parliament could run right through up until 2025. The latest possible date for an election would be the 4th of February 2025 from memory, and that's because Parliament could be dissolved at the last possible moment on the 13th of December 2024. You could then have a 6-week or so general election campaign, at which point a new Parliament would be elected. That's the latest possible time this Parliament could run to, and frankly, if you're a Conservative Party with a large majority, why wouldn't you?
Tom, just remind us who the Prime Minister has been meeting with this morning. Who is with her behind the black door? Who's been into those meetings?
Well, firstly, entering through the back door to number 10 was Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee. Now, the Prime Minister's spokesman said that this was a meeting that the Prime Minister requested, rather than one at the behest of Sir Graham himself. We were told that this was to test the mood, that Liz Truss wanted to know how her backbenchers felt. And how very apt is it that yesterday marked the 100th year anniversary of the meeting that led to the formation of the 1922 committee in the first place, a meeting that led to the resignation of David Lloyd George and the bringing down of a coalition government. Really quite seismic events, the 100th year anniversary of which were yesterday, but also with her, the Deputy Prime Minister Therese Coffey, and we believe the Chief...
Thank you. We'll bring you that statement as soon as we see the Prime Minister. Charlie Rowley, former government insider. We're awaiting words from the Prime Minister. The lectern is there. Do you have any sense of what is about to happen?
I think, given the events of today and the way in which the wind is blowing, I think it is now more than likely that the Prime Minister will come out in a short matter of time and announce that she's stepping down as the leader of the Conservative Party and will be resigning as Prime Minister of the country.
I think it's all but certain that that's what she's going to do, but as we've all been saying, what happens next? Is she going to step down with immediate effect or put out some timetable? Whatever she says, there's going to be more chaos.
How does it feel to be a Conservative Party member on a day like this?
With great sadness, because even if you're... You know, when you've been in there and you've seen things and you've got things done, and even though I'm not there now, but you're still there as a spectator, as a commentator, you're, you know, wanting them to win. You're wanting them to go on. You always want to support your team. And even if the Conservatives haven't done themselves any favours, it seems, through the unforced errors, you still think in your heart that it's always going to be better to have a Conservative
I'd like to say two brief things very, very quickly. Most people go into politics because they want to change things for the better. We should say that. On the other hand, the flip side of that observation is that at such a difficult time for the economy, for hard-pressed families, this political game playing, all these ferrets fighting in a sack in Westminster, a lot of the general public will be sick and tired of, indeed disgusted by this kind of behaviour, constant chopping and changing, when what people want is leadership and stable government so they can get on with their lives.
And those two phrases, economic credibility, economic competence, if she does go in these next few minutes, and whoever will be the next Prime Minister, how likely is that credibility and competence to be held in that we've got a new Chancellor, we'll have to stay in position. We've got the 31st of October fiscal statement, which will have to be gone through. Is it still up to how the markets react to all this?
Yeah, you and I remember Black Wednesday, of course, in '92, Mark, when we crashed out the exchange rate mechanism, and it took the Tories a generation to regain credibility. You know, and obviously Tony Blair and Gordon Brown came in and swept the board for a decade and more. I don't think yet, in economic terms, we're in Black Wednesday territory. Exchange rates are bobbing around and interest rates will continue to creep up as they're creeping up around the world. But I think if they can get hold of this and stabilise the situation, and people like me stop coming on television and talking about the 10-year gilt yield every hour, the borrowing cost that spreads out across the rest of the economy, then even though it's a tough and difficult time, the Tories could just about hang on to their reputation for economic competence, but it's going to be a very, very, very close-run thing.
Yeah.
Olivia, to bring you back in, our political reporter, Olivia Utley, if Liz Truss goes and there is a new leader of this party, is this party governable anymore?
I mean, it's beginning to look like it's not governable anymore. I can't see how and who could restore discipline, which has broken down so completely. You could say that this breakdown of discipline has been in the works really ever since there she is.
Right, there's the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, coming up to the guys outside number 10.
I came into office at a time of great economic and international instability. Families and businesses were worried about how to pay their bills. Putin's illegal war in Ukraine threatens the security of our whole continent, and our country has been held back for too long by low economic growth. I was elected by the Conservative Party with a mandate to change this. We delivered on energy bills and on cutting national insurance. And we set out a vision for a low-tax, high-growth economy that would take advantage of the freedoms of Brexit. I recognise, though, given the situation, I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party. I have therefore spoken to His Majesty the King to notify him that I am resigning as leader of the Conservative Party. This morning I met the chairman of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady. We've agreed that there will be a leadership election to be completed within the next week. This will ensure that we remain on a path to deliver our fiscal plans and maintain our country's economic stability and national security. I will remain as Prime Minister until a successor has been chosen. Thank you.
Truss, Liz Truss has resigned as our Prime Minister, as leader of the Conservative Party. She will be in post for a week while the election takes place. In 1 week's time, Britain will have its third Prime Minister.
Now, the question is, Olivia, how does that election take place? Because we were discussing that she's been put in this position as party leader and therefore Prime Minister by a vote of the party membership. The majority of MPs did not actually vote for her, and this has caused clearly many problems. Do we think that process will now have to be changed?
I think it's clear that the process is going to have to be changed because there's no way that they could put out a vote to the party membership within a week.
Yeah.
She mentioned that it's going to be a leadership contest, which suggests perhaps that it's not going to be just a coronation. It seems likely that maybe two, possibly three, but one would think they'd want to keep it as small as possible. Two candidates will be put to the Tory MPs, and the Tory MPs will choose between them. Suggestion, I mean, obviously, Tory MPs have been hoping for a coronation. What Liz Truss said there makes it sound like that's not going to happen, but at least for the party's sake and for the country's sake, really, it is going to be wrapped up quickly. The last thing we could have taken was another six-week leadership campaign.
Liam, those words, maintaining economic stability, as we were just discussing, the fact that obviously the Chancellor will stay in place, that the October 31st statement will still be there. But in terms of legacy, all she could actually put down on the list was delivering energy bills help and cutting national insurance. And even that energy plan now reduced to 6 months rather than 2 years.
Yeah, it's still a very chunky intervention. 6 months open-ended government commitment to maintain a constant unit price of electricity in the midst of massive geopolitical upheaval. It's still a very, very big deal. And I will maintain, and a lot of people in the markets would stand this up if they ever come out of the shadows, that a lot of the reason for this market turbulence has been that energy support package.
And the potential price.
As opposed to the reduction in the top rate of tax, which, of course, Westminster and the broadcasters alighted on. I must say, I thought she held, on a human level again, she held it together. It was dignified. She's clearly wants to put the stability of the country first and put her, huge ambition to one side. But really incredible scenes. We're now going to have had 5 Tory Prime Ministers in 5 years.
Charlie, former government insider, former advisor to Michael Gove, that big beast. Do the 1922 committee, do they determine the rules? Can they, for want of a better phrase, make it up as they go along? Because if the country is to have a new Prime Minister in 7 days' time, then clearly we're not going to see what we saw during the summer of candidates going around the country addressing members, postal ballots, etc., etc.
I think that's absolutely right. I think what Olivia was saying was spot on, because these are totally unprecedented times. I'm sure that's the phrase that everybody's been using over the last...
No, we'll allow it this time.
Thank you. And in order to ensure that that contest comes to a conclusion within a week, I think the threshold will have to be 50, 60 MPs that you need to sort of have the backing of, even to cut the threshold into a first or second round.
What do you make of this suggestion of a quad, as they've been talking about? That obviously won't be a job share, but there'll have to be some sharing of responsibilities amongst the 4 or 5 front runners.
I think that it might have come to that, were Liz to still sort of, still be in post. But I think the idea that she has now taken the steps to resign, I think it would be the right thing to do for the 1922 to allow parliamentary colleagues to still have a say. If it was decided amongst a small group of 3 or 4 individuals, whether that was the party chairman or Sir Graham Brady or others, I think if whoever the next administration is, and I know we've just seen the end of this one, if things were to go wrong in that sense, then there'd be even more incense within the Conservative Party. So I think allowing MPs to have their say is the right thing to do.
We've got 3 fine political brains, and I'm going to be incredibly unfair to all of you now. Who's your money on to be our next Prime Minister?
I would have thought if Rishi Sunak puts his name forward, I think that would probably be the obvious choice or the favourite because he came first in the MP ballot last time. I think because of the economic plan, a lot of MPs probably think that he was been proved right, and therefore it seems that might be. And you need someone who is a communicator, which Liz, by her own admission, wasn't the strongest. I think Rishi has that package.
Yeah.
Olivia?
I think it could be Penny Mordaunt. I think that Rishi Sunak was not popular among the Trussite wing of the party, among the right of the party now, and I think he might have blown up his chances, whereas Penny Mordaunt has held herself very well over the last few weeks and is thought to be very popular among the country, and now definitely the Conservative Party is looking at facing a general election.
And Liam, on the money, who is your money on?
Gordon Phrase. I think what we've heard are the two standout candidates. Rishi Sunak obviously has, he could tell the country he is the economically competent one who foresaw the market squalls. Penny Mordaunt could be seen as the broader candidate. A good friend of mine, Alison Pearson, doesn't share Penny Mordaunt's politics as a Telegraph columnist, but she wants Penny Mordaunt because she could appeal to the sort of Lib Dems who might go to the Tories. But I would say Kemi Badenoch could come up the middle.
Oh, well, that's a one coming fast on the...
Kemi Badenoch could come up the middle. Why? Because Tory MPs know how popular she is with the rank and file. And I was on stage with Penny Mordaunt at the Tory conference. I saw the whites of the delegates' eyes when she was speaking. She got an absolutely roaring ovation from them. And I think for a lot of Tory rank and file, she represents the only way that they can beat Labour.
Tom Harwood is in Downing Street for us. The door's opened, a policeman's come out. The back door may be opening for the Prime Minister to leave and head off somewhere, because clearly she is in post for another week, but not in power as such, Tom.
Certainly, that's the case, although it's felt like that, frankly, for the last week as well. This has been a Prime Minister who has not really been in control of things ever since she U-turned on the 45p top rate of tax. I think if we're to look at the whole historiography of everything that has gone on, that was the point at which this Prime Minister lost her authority and, frankly, lost her premiership. The point at which she was forced by rebels within her party to U-turn on her big pro-growth budget. The first chink in the armour was there in the 45p rate, and everything else came tumbling down. Not only that, but the corporation tax pledge, her major point of differentiation between herself and Rishi Sunak, that fell away too. Her Chancellor then went, her Home Secretary then went, her Chief Whip then wobbled, and indeed chaos in the voting lobbies too. It all spun from this point of loss of authority at her own party conference. I think we can look back along the long train of these past 2 weeks and see where things really began to spiral politically. Is there another world where Liz Truss, perhaps in a not-for-turning way, would have been able to face down her critics, face down, indeed, the markets? Perhaps, perhaps not. Perhaps her fate was sealed even earlier than that, when international investors simply lost confidence in the ability of the United Kingdom to pay down its debts. There are clearly some big mistakes that have been made over the past few weeks, but yes, there will be a lot to dig over for the historians.
Tom, thank you for that, because we're getting news in of reaction from both Sir Keir Starmer and Sir Ed Davey, leaders of the Liberal Democrat and Labour Party. Leader of Labour, Sir Keir Starmer, saying the British public deserve a proper say on the country's future. They must have the chance to compare the Tories' chaos with Labour's plans to sort out their mess, grow the economy for working people and rebuild the country for a fairer, greener future. We must have a chance at a fresh start. He said we need a general election now.
And we can return now to Tom Harwood. Tom, sorry to interrupt you, but we wanted to tell, I suppose, the predictable call for a general election by the leader of the opposition.
And being echoed by Sir Ed Davey, the Liberal Democrats as well, saying we need a general election now. Yeah. Tom.
Yes, this is indeed what the Labour Party has been calling now for some time.
Tom, so I just wanted to talk about what happens now. We have three very fine political minds with us in the studio, and I asked each of them, Charlie Rowley, former Michael Gove advisor, former government advisor, our own political reporter Olivia Utley, and our own economics and business editor Liam Halligan, who was most likely to be our next Prime Minister. They all came up with different answers. Kemi Badenoch, Penny Mordaunt, Rishi Sunak. How are they going to come together in the Conservative Party and decide who will be our next Prime Minister?
It's going to be a tough contest, and indeed I think we can't emphasise that word enough. It will be a contest, and I think it'll be very different from the broad situation we saw over the summer. We saw a lot of new names come about in that. I think, frankly, there'll be a very big sense amongst Conservative MPs in the coming days that this is not a time for a novice. I think, sadly, for the ideas of people like Kemi Badenoch or perhaps some of those other more outsider voices from the last time round, Tom Tugendhat as well, it will not be their time, because people are going to look for those who have had the experience in government and those who they believe can sort of take the job on from day one, steady the ship as well. So I think we really need to look at those who have served in senior roles in cabinet for some time in terms of those who will be leading the pack next week.
In your assessment, Tom, that Jeremy Hunt could switch from number 11 to number 10 and become the Prime Minister, and someone, perhaps even Rishi Sunak, come back as Chancellor?
Well, that is a large bit of speculation. However, I have to say that I've seen the Guido Fawkes website this afternoon reporting that they've spoken to a source close to Jeremy Hunt saying that he is not considering standing to be the next Prime Minister. We'll have to see if that is borne out. I haven't had that confirmed myself. However, I have to say my phone has been pinging quite a bit since that statement.
Yeah.
I have
Tom, just on that, we've just got a bit more breaking news.
We're still awaiting.
Penny Mordaunt, basically the Commons leader, saying she will keep calm and carry on. Asked in the Commons about Liz Truss's resignation, she said, "I'm going to keep calm and carry on, and I would suggest everyone else do the same."
However, let me just update you with what The Sun's political editor, Harry Cole, is saying. And I'd like to bring in everybody in the studio too. Talk of candidates chosen Monday with online vote of members with result next Friday. Wow. Currently not formally confirmed. But if the members are going to be involved in this process again, well, that is quite extraordinary. Tom, your reaction? It's not confirmed, but the Sun's political editor, you know, they have their sources.
Yes, and very good sources, very connected to those behind the scenes in the Conservative Party as well. It would be extraordinary if this was to go ahead. Of course, Harry Cole, they're reporting that there's just talk of that sort of confirmatory vote online by members, not guaranteed. I think that MPs may well be wary of that, given what they saw happened last time. Although, if we were talking about this even a matter of hours ago, there was big speculation that nothing would move unless there was a coronation. Now we're talking about a 7-day leadership contest and potentially even a confirmatory vote of the membership. Things are moving incredibly quickly.
And Tom, let's just reflect on what's happened in terms of the time element. She is, as you were saying, the shortest tenure of any Prime Minister, 45 days. The second shortest, George Canning, in 1827, who'd served for 119 days. What damage will this do to the party, no matter who tries to come in to lead it?
Well, the party will now be trying to pretend that the last 45 days did not happen. And yet, it's very hard to undo that. And will the public be willing to give this party, who's now rattled through 4 prime ministers since it first got into office in 2010, will they be willing to give this party another go? Will the public really be looking at this party that has said, frankly, it made a mistake? Now, Liz Truss, after 45 days, the shortest serving, of course, if we add 7 to that gets to 52 by my count. 52, that magic number in British politics, keeps coming back and back after referendums and polls and everything else. But there are 2 disputed former Prime Ministers of the United Kingdom. The Earl of Bath is said to have potentially, although it is disputed, maybe have served for as Prime Minister, First Lord of the Treasury, for 2 days. And the Earl of Waldegrave, 4 days as well. So those are 2 disputed Whig politicians in the 1740s and the 1750s who Liz Truss may well be trying to claim were actually Prime Minister, although historians, of course, differ on that. But looking forward rather than to the past, this is going to be a manic weekend. I think that many members of Parliament who were considering going back to their constituencies and having a hounding from their constituents may well be sticking around in Westminster and may well be plotting, building campaign teams and seeing what more can be done in what is frankly going to look quite a lot like a rerun of what we saw over the summer.
Indeed, Tom. Well, let's just remind people who are joining us, watching and listening, what's happened. Another momentous day at number 10. Liz Truss, with that resignation speech at Downing Street, this is what she had to say.
I came into office at a time of great economic and international instability. Families and businesses were worried about how to pay their bills. Putin's illegal war in Ukraine threatens the security of our whole continent, and our country has been held back for too long by low economic growth. I was elected by the Conservative Party with a mandate to change this. We delivered on energy bills and on cutting national insurance. And we set out a vision for a low-tax, high-growth economy that would take advantage of the freedoms of Brexit. I recognise, though, given the situation, I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party. I have therefore spoken to His Majesty the King to notify him that I am resigning as leader of the Conservative Party. This morning I met the chairman of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady. We've agreed that there will be a leadership election to be completed within the next week. This will ensure that we remain on a path to deliver our fiscal plans and maintain our country's economic stability and national security. I will remain as Prime Minister until a successor has been chosen. Thank you.
Then that is now. She is, we think, perhaps still inside number 10, in office, but effectively not in power, although that will be decided in the next week. And just to remind you, we are getting confirmation. Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, confirming he will not stand in that election. So I have actually lost out in the Gloria De Piero office sweepstake on the next Prime Minister.
And you see, I was wise. I didn't put a bet down.
Oh, right.
And we are joined in the studio by Charlie Rowley, who is a former government advisor. He advised Michael Gove. We have our political reporter with us in the studio, Olivia Utley, and we have our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan. Oh, Liam Halligan's pointing at you.
I just want to, going back to my my roots, I just want to say what the odds are. So the current betting odds are 9-4 on Rishi Sunak. So he's the favourite at the moment. Penny Mordaunt's at 5-1. Ben Wallace is at 17-2. Boris Johnson is 10-1. Someone called Michael Gove, I don't know if you know who he is, Charlie, is 33-1, and Kemi Badenoch is 20-1. So,
well, you make a few bob and Kemi Badenoch, though,
if you put some Well, I couldn't possibly comment. I'm an Ofcom regulated broadcaster, Mark.
Yes, don't encourage betting.
I don't know about you.
You're quite right. Yeah. Let's ask someone else about the betting odds.
Charlotte, I wanted to ask you, because you're a political insider, you've been a political insider. What happens? Have you been involved in leadership campaigns? Just talk us through what happens inside those campaigns. How do you get them off the ground? What happens now?
Well, this will be slightly different because we've had one not so long ago. So there will still be a support base amongst some of the candidates. There'll be Team Rishi, there'll be Team Penny. So I think the first thing you'll be doing is setting up a famous Grant Shapps spreadsheet to make sure that those MPs are still on side, to make sure that you've still got their support. And then you'll have a base to work from. But you will appoint a team of very, very close colleagues to go out and do your sort of bidding, as it were. So you'll have a team around you to go and contact other colleagues to find out what it is that they wanted, maybe what jobs that they might want in a Rishi or a Penny government, possibly a combination of the two. That would be quite ideal for me if I was being open about my views.
Is there any possibility that they could actually get together and say, to go through all this again will be so damaging, let's actually decide between ourselves how we go and just put one candidate forward?
Well, I'm a member of the Conservative Party, so I'm entitled to have a vote in the race. But I think that approach would be the best approach forward. I don't want to vote in this election necessarily because I want MPs to come together. They are the ones that have now got to get the legislation through. It's not me. It doesn't matter what I think. I will always support the team as a Conservative Party member. So as long as Conservative MPs can make that choice, I think we'd be better for it.
But egos. And I have seen this myself, obviously. So when Jeremy Corbyn stood to be leader of the Labour Party, we tried to get either Liz Kendall, Yvette Cooper, Andy Burnham. If two had dropped out, Jeremy Corbyn would not have won the leadership. But they don't, because egos get in the way, don't they, Olivia? So that dream scenario that Mark suggested and Charlie said that would be the ideal scenario, what are the chances of it happening?
I think it seems very unlikely that there is going to be a coronation. It's going to be probably 2, perhaps 3 candidates. And then the question becomes, will they or won't they go to the membership? We had a problem last time over the summer. The general public and some media outlets were getting quite frustrated at the idea that it's not particularly democratic, having only a couple of 100,000, less than 200,000.
119,000, someone suggesting, as small as that.
So, I heard figures between 140 and about 115, And is it democratic to have that tiny little support base choosing who the Prime Minister of the country is? If they made it an online vote, that base would grow an awful lot smaller because we know that the Conservative Party members tend to be quite old, aren't particularly au fait with sort of online voting systems. Whatever they do, it would have to be dreamt up incredibly quickly. And the idea that these members, many of whom are in their 70s, 80s, 90s, would get across the sort of online voting process.
I mean, does the software even exist? You'd have to build a sort of a voting system. And I'm just thinking, as Olivia was speaking there, I'm just surmising, if Harry Cole is right, talk of going to the members. Interestingly, Harry Cole is in the middle of writing a book about Liz Truss. I wonder what's going to happen to that. It's called Out of the Blue. If members are to be consulted, as Harry suggests, and he's a ridiculously well-connected journalist, I don't mind saying that, even though he's from a rival stable, because he just is, then how... It may be that members in the parliamentary party, knowing that they've really knocked the membership, the envelope stuffers, the rank and file, the people they need to knock on doors and campaign to get out the Tory vote, without the Tory members, the Tory party is going to get monstered at the next election. It probably will anyway, or it possibly will anyway. How is the share of influence going to be spread between the MPs and the members? That's my point. But before, the party in the Parliament would give the members 2 candidates to vote on. I mean, if there's only 2 candidates to vote on, maybe members in the country may feel again they've been shortchanged by the parliamentary party. They may want a broader choice.
Yeah, and will Sir Graham Brady have had to discuss that in that meeting in Downing Street? Of course, we're just seeing.
I'm sure that's what they were discussing. The mechanics and the mechanism of this leadership contest.
Olivia wanted to come in.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting always looking at the market, seeing what's happening. The installation of Jeremy Hunt as Prime Minister didn't seem to reassure the markets, but I'm now reading that the pound has risen against the dollar since the resignation of Liz Truss. So those saying that we needed stability and that Liz Truss had to stay in place, it seems are wrong. But it seems strange that the markets now assume that we're going to reach some sort of stability.
Yeah. Let's bring in Catherine Foster at Downing Street. Catherine, what is the mood there? I mean, I know the couple of the cartoons this morning were suggesting small earthquake in Downing Street caused by fracking vote in Commons. I mean, they're not far off the mark, are they?
Yes, it has been quite a day after the events of last night. I've been here since 7 o'clock this morning. It was cold, it was dark. There were very few media here. Now there are enormous numbers of camera crews from all over the world. Liz Truss came out. There was only about 20 minutes notice of the press conference. We had been told by the Prime Minister's spokesman only in the previous hour that there would be no public statement today. Things changed very, very fast. What really struck me was the weather. It was 6 weeks and 2 days since Liz Truss became Prime Minister. There was a big rainstorm, if you remember. Her appearance at the podium was delayed by the rainstorm. The rain stopped and she said, together. She was talking, of course, through the economic storm that the country faced. But the storm that has engulfed the Conservative Party has now removed Liz Truss after 45 days. It really is quite incredible, and all the questions are, of course, what happens next. She said she will remain in place till a successor is found, but clearly that successor, we do not know who it will be. The details are being fleshed out. There is apparently a meeting at 4 o'clock this afternoon to decide what the rules are. We do know that the current Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has ruled himself out. He said the other day that his wife and children had ruled him out too. That has been repeated. We would expect Rishi Sunak certainly to run. Of course, Penny Mordaunt, who's keeping calm and carrying on apparently. Ben Wallace, big question mark over him, isn't there? Because, of course, he was massively popular and with the members and indeed with the party, but chose not to run in the summer when Boris Johnson stood down. Will he now step up and enter the fray? Could they come to some agreement between them? The thinking was that they really needed to do that before Truss announced that she was going, but events seem to have overtaken that. Obviously, there will be relief, in a sense, in the party that this is now nearly over. It's been deeply traumatic. They've watched their poll ratings plunge. They got rid of Boris Johnson because they thought he was an electoral liability. And they've seen their poll ratings drop even further. But what happens next is far from clear.
Extraordinary, Catherine, is that leadership contest, which did go on for a long time, that Conservative leadership contest, it actually went on longer than the Prime Minister's tenure. But the next contest will be a short one, won't it?
Yes, we understand it will be around a week, so all being well, this time next week it may be nearing the end, and hopefully maybe by next weekend we might know who the Prime Minister is going to be. And of course, some stability is urgently needed because the markets have been up and down. You know, we've seen these huge costs in borrowing, the pound plunge. Now things did recover a little. Apparently now that Liz Truss is going, things are improving. That is bringing some sort of certainty, I suppose. But I suspect the market's choice would be Rishi Sunak. But what the MP's choice will be remains to be seen. Of course, he was popular with more of the Conservative MPs than Liz Truss was, although he didn't have a majority of them either. Penny Mordaunt might be able to. Kemi Badenoch, I think a lot depends really on whether they give Conservative Party members a say in this. The feeling has been, one of the few things talking to MPs that they seem to agree on, was that the members should not be let fact near the leadership election when it came under any circumstances, simply because of the disastrous results that we've seen over the last 6 weeks and 2 days. Now, Harry Cole from The Sun is reporting that the members may have a say. If the members do have a say, that could potentially change everything. They were very keen on, for instance, Kemi Badenoch. They were very keen on Penny Mordaunt, but so much is unknown. But of course, what we do know is that the Conservative Party will soon have their 5th Prime Minister in the space of just 6 years. They have got rid of Liz Truss. They have got rid of Boris Johnson. They have got rid of Theresa May. The MPs increasingly ungovernable, and it will be fascinating to see what happens next.
Yeah, and we'll just break away, Catherine, to speak to Olivia on that particular point, because we've got Sir Keir Starmer and Sir Ed Davey already out of the blocks saying we've got to have a general election. That's going to be very difficult now for the Tories to ignore when they talk about stability and democracy and so on, given that, you know, even though this will be an election of MPs and the party membership, it's not going to the country to get their view.
Yeah, it's quite tenuous to argue that the new Prime Minister would have a strong democratic mandate to carry out whatever programme they wanted to carry out. We've seen in the past, obviously, Gordon Brown became Prime Minister without an election, Theresa May became Prime Minister without an election. This does happen. But for the Prime Minister who replaced the Prime Minister who was elected to then be replaced by another Prime Minister, you're getting further and further away from that democratic mandate. Not to mention the fact that since 2019, obviously the political situation, the global situation has changed dramatically. We've had COVID, we've had the war in Ukraine, we've had a Prime Minister who was sticking to that manifesto. Liz Truss had completely new ideas which she threw in there, and the next Prime Minister will want to throw in their 2 cents as well. So to what extent is the government that is about to be formed going to be the government who the public voted for in 2019? Exactly.
Charlie, your view on that?
Well, I think whilst the Conservative Party is very good historically at winning elections, they're not going to call one now. So I think a general election will take far longer than it will take to elect just a new Prime Minister in the space of a week. So I think because it's been such a short tenure for Liz Truss, I think we'll be able to put this behind us quickly. We'll have a new leader in place, there'll be a new cabinet, and probably get back to the things that we set out to do in 2019 in that manifesto, which what won the Conservative Party that 80-seat majority. This political exercise has clearly come and it's now gone. And we'll move forward until 2024, 2025.
Let's move away from Downing Street to go back to Westminster, because the politicians are still there, including a certain Penny Mordaunt, who in the Commons has said we all should be keeping calm and carrying on. And of course, she has been suggested as one of the potential new leaders of the party and Prime Minister. Tom Harwood is there for us. Tom, what's been the reaction?
Yes, lots going on down here in Westminster. I'm delighted indeed to be joined by Jim Pickard of the Financial Times here live on College Green, just outside Parliament, where we're expecting now Sir Graham Brady to make a statement in around 10 minutes' time. What do you think he's going to say?
So we're hoping he's going to set out the parameters for how this new leadership contest is going to happen, because Liz Truss was very clear that this is going to be over within a week, by the end of next week, and therefore that's raised people's thoughts, like, is it just going to be MPs doing the voting, or is it going to be an electric ballot of the membership, which is possible? I mean, there'll be massive ructions if they don't let the membership have a say in this. So let's hope they have some kind of method that they've already worked out, and they're not just doing this in a fly-by-night way, but it's quite possible that details to follow. But in 10 minutes, we need to be there, seeing what Graham Brady says about the contest.
Of course, he was inside number 10 for quite some hours with Liz Truss. Do you think that she will have been speaking to this process? Is this the timing of her choosing or of Sir Graham's?
It's impossible to know precisely. I mean, we know that this has happened to Liz Truss quite quickly. She seems to have made her mind up overnight. I think genuinely yesterday she still thought she could fight her way through this. But I think the chaos we saw with Suella Braverman resigning as Home Secretary, the chaos we saw in the divisions last night over that fracking vote has just brought things to a head where she just seems to want it to be over. And it makes her the shortest living Prime Minister in British history. I think Canning made it to just over 100 days and she's made it to 44 or 45.
Yeah, it'll be 52, quite aptly, that magic number that keeps coming back to British politics. 52 days by this time next week. Firstly, though, looking at whoever may replace her, they'll be picking up the shards of a shattered party, an infighting party, an almost ungovernable party. Is it repairable?
So I've been covering politics here for the FT for 15 years, and I've seen my fair share of chaos. I've seen the Labour Party try to destroy Jeremy Corbyn with something like 160 MPs rising up against him. I've seen the defenestration of Theresa May, the bringing down of Boris Johnson. This is the first one I've seen which has been so kind of self-inflicted. You know, if you think about Theresa May, she had a majority of 1 or 2 MPs, and therefore every tiny rebellion she was vulnerable. These guys have still got a majority of 80 MPs, that's the biggest majority that any party's had in Parliament for decades. And so to throw it all away with this mini budget, which was a catastrophe, let's not pretend otherwise, and then this weird fracking vote that didn't need to be a 3-line whip, I've never seen anything fall apart so quickly. So I think whoever succeeds her does still inherit a very large majority. They also inherit economic conditions which are very, very unstable. We're going to have rising mortgage rates. We still have the issue of energy prices hanging over us when that 6-month energy scheme ends. So the person who takes the chalice, it is going to be somewhat poisoned. And I think the problem we've got is that there's so much bad blood between supporters of Boris Johnson, who are still angry, supporters of Rishi Sunak, who still feel aggrieved about the membership. The ERG aren't very happy with the Sunak people. There's so much bad blood that it's hard to see who the unity candidate's going to be. And the next week's going to be quite fun, isn't it?
And just finally, the Labour Party and the Lib Dems now calling for a general election. Will they get one?
They don't want a general election. They have to say it because you can't be in opposition and pretend that you don't want a general election. But the idea that Keir Starmer really wants to be a number 10 right now, taking responsibility for mortgage rates rising, house prices crashing, people's energy bills, people being turfed out of their homes, which is what we're likely to see over the next year. I think they'd be quite happy with an election in 2 years' time, but I think they'd be a bit disappointed to lose Truss, having been 36 points ahead in the polls.
Well, Jim Pickard of the FT, thank you so much for joining us here on College Green on the most momentous day in British politics, well, since the last one.
Indeed, and more to come perhaps as well. Tom, for the moment, thank you. And let's just pick up with Olivia on this point that Tom was making, that we are going to hear from Sir Graham Brady, who, let's remind people, is the chair of the 1922 committee of backbenchers, who one assumes perhaps gave the coup de grace in number 10 a little earlier. But the key question now about how they elect this new party leader and therefore Prime Minister.
Yeah, I think someone, whether it's Graham Brady or someone else, is going to have to clear up quite quickly how this is going to happen, because obviously whether or not the members are involved in the process will make an enormous difference to who the new Prime Minister is. We saw during the last contest, and in fact the one before as well, that party members and MPs in the Conservative Party don't often see eye to eye on who should be the Prime Minister. And I think there are probably quite a lot of party members who feel, as Charlie here does, that they don't particularly want to say that it's MPs who've got to come together now, and MPs who are worried about what their constituents think, who are talking to their constituents, might be able to tell the mood in the country rather better than Conservative Party members.
Charlie, former government insider and current Conservative Party member, how unrepresentative are you saying you don't want to vote? I mean, come on, I sense you're quite unrepresentative. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I don't know. I mean, for me, it just seems perfectly clear that, to maintain a Conservative government, you've got to win the next election. Now, I'm not on the ballot on the next election, as far as I know. But I know there are brilliant MPs, Conservative MPs, in red wall seats that won their seats for the first time, where people lent their vote. And this is what we have to remember as a party. People lent their vote to the Conservative Party. They didn't give it on a 10-year sort of term. It was because of the way in which, the campaign was run, because of the manifesto commitments. It's those colleagues I want to see back, right. And it's the legislation that this Conservative government has got to get through. All of that rests with current MPs. It doesn't rest with me. So I'm perfectly happy to not vote and allow MPs to select who they want as the next leader.
It's a good try. But a lot of the Conservative rank and file, I mean, I live in a constituency, a very Conservative constituency. I'm obviously not a member of the Conservative Party, but I do talk to lots of local members of the Conservative Party, and they keep thinking that the Parliamentary Party is distant from the party in the country. Look on Brexit. The Parliamentary Party completely lost the plot on Brexit. There are many people trying to reverse the vote. That incensed the party in the country. I think a lot of that bad blood is still there, with all respect to your party, Charlie. And I think a lot of the rank and file, the people who stuff the envelopes and knock on doors and get out the vote, they're losing patience with MPs for keep putting forward the wrong people for them to vote on.
Right. On that very note, keep calm and carry on was the message from Penny Mordaunt in the Commons. You've spotted on social media that actually she started.
Well, there's a grassroots campaign, PM for PM. And that's not Penny Mordaunt's personal Twitter account. We were just discussing it during the break. But the grassroots campaign for Penny Mordaunt on social media, on Twitter, is already saying only Penny can get us back to where we need to be. But that's not an official endorsement from Penny Mordaunt herself, we should stress.
And Olivia, the talk of whether the membership will be involved in this next contest, one could argue that they haven't made a brilliant fist of it the last time round. How mindful will Graham Brady and the 1922 committee and Tory Central Office, I guess, who come up with these rules for how the very quick contest will take place, but given the experience of the members' choice that we've just gone through, where the contest lasted longer than the serving Prime Minister, will he really let the members decide again?
Well, it's a very delicate balance that Graham Brady's going to have to strike here, because on the one hand, you don't want Conservative Party members leaving in their droves at this stage when a general election is probably round the corner. You need those people there to be knocking on doors, to be stuffing envelopes, to be doing the sort of mechanisms of a general election campaign. So you don't want to infuriate them by not allowing them a vote. On the other hand, as you say, Conservative Party members you could say, haven't been particularly good at picking prime ministers. And in fact, although they seem to be rather fickle, 6 weeks ago, the vast majority of Conservative Party members wanted Liz Truss over Rishi Sunak. In the last couple of days, polling has suggested the vast majority of Conservative Party members want Rishi Sunak over Liz Truss. So I don't quite know where that balance lies, but I think what is also going to come into it, as well as the politics of it all, is the practicalities. Because as Liam mentioned earlier, I mean, do we even have the software to be able to get that vote going, an online vote going within a week? Seems almost fanciful. And then there's the democratic element. Yes, perhaps one could say that having 120,000 members of the country voting for the new Prime Minister is more democratic than a handful of MPs. But I think you could quite convincingly argue that actually MPs are there representing their constituents. They know what their constituents want.
Let me just break in to say that there's reaction with the jury is out in France because the French President Emmanuel Macron says, on a personal level, I'm always sad to see a colleague go, but important that the UK finds stability as soon as possible. Making that point as he arrived for a European Union summit in Brussels. We want, above all, stability. Graham Brady.
The reason I've spoken to the party chairman and discussed the parameters of a process is to look at how we can make the whole thing happen, including the party being consulted by Friday next week.
Do you accept this as a complete dog's dinner?
It's certainly not a circumstance that I would wish to see.
So, Graham, will you have to make the threshold for nominations really high in order to flush out candidates? You just can't waste time with this now, can you?
I think these are details that will be clear later on. I haven't got any more detail to share with you now, but there will be some clarity later this afternoon.
How disappointed are you? Just one more question. How disappointed are you in this? This is the third Prime Minister in 4 months. The public must be looking at this thinking, what on earth is going on? This is the governing party.
Absolutely.
And they are not running the country.
And I think we're deeply conscious of the imperative in the national interest of resolving this clearly and quickly.
So they're not just be a general election, Sir Graham. They're not just be a general election. How can you continue to
clearly
the next
clearly isn't a matter for me.
Will there definitely be two candidates going forward to the membership?
The party's rules say there will be two candidates unless there is only one candidate.
So if somebody drops out, it could only be one.
If there is only one candidate, there is only one candidate.
Do you expect that to happen?
I really can't give you any more detail.
The idea again was it to have this contest truncated to 1 week? Was it Liz Truss's idea, or was it your proposal?
I think it's a matter on which there is a pretty broad consensus.
Thank you, Sir Graham.
Thank you. Do you like?
That was good. That was good. Sorry, so Tories will...
1922 committee have been caught on the hop. Not the circumstances I would like to see, Sir Graham saying details will be cleared up later on. Indication they're perhaps trying to work out what on earth to do.
It wouldn't be his call, would it? The Conservative Party board would have to be involved in this, which is a representative of members.
Yes, and only a couple of hours ago, it sounded as though they were going to wait to decide how the party was going to do the leadership election before Liz Truss resigned. But obviously, events have taken over here, and as you say, it feels like the 1922 committee have been caught on the hop. So when is the party board going to get involved? It's all still unbelievably unclear.
Whatever happens, Charlie, former government insider, it's difficult to see how this party, which has found division and factionalism just a part of everyday business for some years, can get over that under a new leader. There is never a leader that represents all strands of opinion. Which leader would be most likely to unify the party, in your view?
I think the candidate that can go on and lead the Conservative Party to beat Labour at the next general election. And I think that is the one thing now.
Are they that focused? Are they focused enough on that?
They've got to have to be. And you're absolutely right. There's been division for such a long time, whether it was Brexit under Theresa, whether it was the issues in Downing Street under Boris. You've got to come together. The one thing that will or should unify the party is just beating Labour or just winning the next general election. So whatever your policy difference is, you've got to put those to one side.
Because is that the very fact, though, that you are probably talking about a general election coming round the bend a lot faster than the party would like, and looking at the polls, Labour is way ahead?
Well, exactly. That is the worry as a Conservative. Of course, you see Labour ahead in the polls. We need to pull that back. So you need to ensure that you have a leader that, as I say, that can go on and beat Labour, but then they need to have a policy platform. And whether you agree with all the policies, the reality is you won't be able to make the policies if you're not in government. So get a leader that can win the election, get behind them, win the election, and then you can go on and lead the country.
Let's bring in Ben Harris-Quinney, who's the chairman of the Bow Group, the Conservative think tank. And Ben, clearly there's going to be a lot of thinking going on amongst the Conservative Party members, including Sir Graham Brady, as we just heard. How on earth do you organise this now?
Well, I think there's been a bit of misremembering as to what has happened in the past. The Conservative Party membership voted for Liz Truss, but only out of a choice of two. And I think if they'd had the full breadth of candidates, you would be very likely to see Suella Braverman or Kemi Badenoch would have won that contest. And if we had an open primary process, like in the United States, I don't even think any current member of Parliament would lead the Conservative Party. So rather than less democracy being the answer, I think more democracy is the answer, because the fundamental problem that the Conservative Party has had over the last 12 years and longer is that the MPs have been completely out of touch, not only with the members, but more importantly, the voters. And I think Boris Johnson was the leader that most spoke to those voters, and that's why he won the largest majority since Thatcher. The anemic majorities or minority governments delivered by the likes of Theresa May and David Cameron seems to be where the Conservative Party is headed back to, but is obviously not the answer.
But if after the members have chosen Liz Truss and that has turned out spectacularly badly, isn't there a case for just leaving it to members of Parliament? Would it have been easier if they'd have gone for the most popular candidate amongst MPs, which was Rishi Sunak?
Well, we live in a democracy, and in a democracy, the people are supposed to decide who govern the country, not a narrow elite. And we saw with the Brexit vote how out of touch both Parliament and government, and indeed the Conservative government at the time, were with the country. I think the Parliament was roughly 70% Remain, government was roughly the same, and the tagline that won the Brexit vote, I think, was "Take back control." And as a member of the British public, I think that it feels like the public is losing control at quite an extraordinary rate. We are entering into what can only be described as a technocracy, with figures like Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak sort of being fostered upon the public. And I'm afraid I have to agree with Keir Starmer. I think we are stretching the credulity of democracy, and we need an election.
So given that, and given the snap polls that we've got at the moment, you are going to be voting yourselves out of power if you do that.
Well, the Bow Group is a small C Conservative organisation, not a big C Conservative organisation. If you look at what has happened throughout Europe, the establishment Conservative parties are replaced by parties that are more in touch with the electorate and what voters want. And, you know, any political system should be Darwinian. And if the Conservative Party can no longer govern, if the Conservative Party can no longer deliver Conservative values that people keep voting for, like cutting immigration, like abandoning net zero and getting the finances, public finances under control, then I don't think the Conservative Party deserves to govern, deserves to even really be a force in British politics anymore. So
very quickly, just to ask you, is this the moment that the Conservative Party then has to rethink itself and reform and become something different?
Yes, I absolutely think that. But I think what we're headed towards is you know, a candidate like Rishi Sunak, because it provides stability in the short term, but in the medium to long term, it doesn't answer the question of that deep chasm that exists between what the voters want and what MPs and what the leadership, at least, of the Conservative Party has wanted in recent years. And ultimately, if you can't get that right, you're never going to get government right, because you can't govern with a base and with authority. And you know, you look, with the Conservatives been in government for 12 years now. Tony Blair is someone I very strongly disagree with in terms of the policies he implemented, but he left an indelible mark on the country. He changed the country on the basis of his vision. I don't really know what the Conservatives have done in the last 12 years. Brexit was forced upon them. That was a people's movement. The rest of it has been complete chaos.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, very interesting point indeed. Ben Harris-Quinney, Chairman of the Bow Group, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I know you've had to wait until all these shenanigans finish at number 10. Thanks for your patience.
I want to come to you, Liam Halligan, now, if I may, because, of course, on the 31st of October, there is supposed to be a fiscal statement. There are a number of policies that have been outlined by Liz Truss. I mean, are they all... Do they stand?
Who knows?
I mean, seriously, what will that do to the financial stability of the country?
And that's why the markets are... I mean, Olivia's right. The pound originally spiked up, but now it's bouncing around and no one really knows, because people are processing the fact that the Hunt budget was obviously a compromise between Liz Truss and Jeremy Hunt, his reversal of the mini budget, depending on who... You know, we're going to have a new MP, if I can quickly do a PM before that... that statement,
exactly.
And that new Prime Minister will need to have a say about the fiscal statement on the 31st of October, even though he or she will only have 2 days. This is where we are. I think some of the... You saw Graham Brady there, who's a very sure-footed person, as the chairman of the 1922 committee, being put under pressure, and rightly so. I sometimes chide political reporters the way they act, as you know, but rightly so. They were barking at him, looking for answers, because the country needs to know, the financial markets need to know what these rules are going to be, so people can start to surmise, make some assessment of who the next leader is going to be, because it does depend on the balance of influence in this leadership election under these rules between the parliamentary party and the party in the country, because they have different preferences.
I mean, we've heard this term lockstep. Would Penny Mordaunt and Rishi Sunak actually be in lockstep with Jeremy Hunt and what he said so far?
Penny Mordaunt and Rishi Sunak are from completely different wings of the parliamentary party.
But in terms of the economic policy.
No, they're completely different people. They couldn't really be more diametrically opposed in both style and substance of their approach to economic policy making. And so, you know, it may be a kind of politically nicely calibrated package to have Mordaunt and Sunak, but would it possibly hold the road, given that they have completely different views?
And just to sort of not worry anybody at home, we can assume that there will be no candidate who's going to suggest not helping people through the winter with their bills. That will remain.
Absolutely. I think the energy price cap is absolutely nailed on. The reversal in Rishi Sunak's national insurance increase, taking off 1.25% national increase contributions, that is now through Parliament, so that's a done deal. The corporation tax, I'd be amazed if that didn't rise to 25% as Jeremy Hunt. I can't see any of the candidates who would try to reverse that reversal of a reversal. Crikey, keep up. So I think for the most part, what Jeremy Hunt said in his mini-budget reversal will stand, because as you rightly say, Mark, it's all about stability now. The Conservatives desperately need stability if they're going to have any hope of even making a fist of standing at the next general election.
Yeah, well, let's just remind you what Sir Graham Brady was saying, that we should have a new leader in place before that fiscal statement on the 31st. Tom Harwood was there with all those political correspondents throwing the questions. It does seem as if they were really caught on the hop by this, Tom.
They were indeed, and I just have to say, before we get a little bit further into this conversation, torrential rain has begun to pour down on Westminster in a very poetic bookend to the premiership of Liz Truss. If we remember back to her ascension to the role of Prime Minister, people might remember the torrential storm in which the situation found itself. The podium in Downing Street had to be covered by a black bin bag, and a stream of water ran underneath the feet of some very, very soggy political correspondents there on Downing Street. How fitting is it that 5 weeks later we find ourselves in precisely the same situation, thankfully covered by a bit of a tent here on College Green. I hope you can hear me over the sound of the torrential rain. What a storm. But yes, Sir Graham Brady saying that by the 28th of this month, Friday the 28th of October, this leadership race will be sewn up. A week tomorrow we will have a new leader of the Conservative Party and indeed new Prime Minister. And the precise rules of that race, the thresholds by which people will need to be nominated, the number of rounds we will get, and the precise days on which they will fall, and indeed the way in which the membership of the Conservative Party will be consulted. Well, that's all to be decided. The executive of the 1922 committee is meeting this afternoon to set out those rules, and hopefully we will have an announcement of those rules this evening, although that may be a little bit later. But clearly, Sir Graham there saying to us just outside St Stephen's entrance to Parliament, saying that he consulted with the chairman of the Conservative Party, Jake Berry, earlier today to make sure that it was possible to consult the membership in such a short space of time. Jake Berry telling Sir Graham Brady that it is indeed possible that an online ballot can take place between those final two candidates. But for all of the specifics in terms of how it will be done, when members will be able to vote, the threshold by which parliamentarians may be able to stand for leader, the number of nominations they will need, and the number of rounds that there will be to get to those final two, for now, those are still open questions.
Tom, leadership contests in parties are necessarily brutal. The last thing this party can afford is any more brutality. How do they avoid it?
Well, I suppose part of that will be the consideration to run a very short leadership election campaign. Frankly, the shorter the race is, the less opportunities there are for those wounds to be opened, for real nastiness to set hold. But clearly there will be a risk. It's the top job in the country and people will scrap for it. Now, there have been moments in the past where these things have been curtailed even sooner. It may well be the case if a standalone candidate emerges over the weekend. If after the first ballot someone is streets ahead of other candidates, it may well be that this is an even shorter contest. That has, of course, happened in the past. Back in 2003, when Ian Duncan Smith was removed as Conservative Party leader, Michael Howard sort of emerged as a consensus candidate without the need for an election at all. And then in 2016, when Theresa May was so far ahead of Andrea Leadsom, well, that leadership contest was curtailed too, cutting short the premiership of David Cameron, making sure he couldn't actually go on that tour of European countries he wanted to do in those final weeks of his premiership. Potentially, it might not even last the week next week. It could be even shorter, but that's if the Conservatives can settle on someone who seems to be miles ahead. The problem for this party is that it is deeply divided, it is fractious, it is infighting, and it doesn't seem like at this moment in time there will be that single candidate miles ahead of everyone else. So yes, it could be fairly scrappy as the week goes on next week, and no doubt there will be many, many serious and stark conversations taking place over the coming hours and indeed days.
Tom, indeed, and of course the discussions beginning about whether we should be facing a general election as well. For the moment, in that, as you say, the monsoon, the political monsoon at Westminster. Back to you in a moment, but let's reflect that the Labour Party leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has reacted by saying the country faces now a choice between a stable Labour government or, as he said, Tory chaos.
What a mess. And this is not just a soap opera at the top of the Tory party. It's doing huge damage to our economy and to the reputation of our country. And the public are paying with higher prices, with higher mortgages. So we can't have a revolving door of chaos. We can't have another experiment at the top of the Tory party. There is an alternative, and that's a stable Labour government. And the public are entitled to have their say, and that's why there should be a general election.
Some sympathy for Liz Truss. Her time in office pretty humiliating.
The damage that has been inflicted on the public through higher prices and mortgages is considerable. This is not a soap opera. These are real lives that are being impacted by the mess at the top of the Tory party. We've had this revolving door. We've had these experiments at the top of the Tory party. The public are entitled to choose between this utter chaos and a Labour Party which will stabilise the economy and have got a clear plan for growth, for living standards and for jobs of the future. We need a general election so the public can make their mind up about this utter chaos.
Isn't there an argument that a general election might actually prolong the instability to an outcome of that general election? Do we need more instability now, or just a chance for a clean state and just to stabilise the ship?
The risk at the moment is continuing with this chaos, not having a stable Labour government. So that's why there should be a general election. We can't just allow the Tory party to keep putting up the next candidate in the middle of this chaos. There is a choice. There's a Labour Party that's capable of, stabilising the economy, has a clear plan, and the public are entitled to choose between that stable Labour government and this utter chaos of the Conservatives.
Are you ready for government? This is not the context you would have wanted to take over.
We are ready to form a government to stabilise the economy and implement a real plan for growth, for living standards, to help people through a cost of living crisis. And that's the choice now, a stable Labour government or this utter chaos from the Conservatives.
That was Sir Keir Starmer talking a few minutes ago. Let's talk now to a veteran. He won't mind us saying that. Peter Spencer, who's political commentator, former Sky News political correspondent, and now a blogger as well, from the depths of Cornwall. But you've come back to Westminster to join in an extraordinary day once more. How do you read where the Tory party is going to take this? Sir Graham Brady saying, we've got a week to sort this out.
Sure. I mean, what they are is a hotbed of hatreds right now. There are those who back Sunak and those who can't bear the man. There are those who back Hunt and those who can't. They call him Mr. 18, a reference to the number of votes that he got in.
Ooh, ouch.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then there are those who bring back Boris. And believe it or not, they're sort of having committed unpardonable sins, and I think, well, he's less rubbish than the other lot.
So is it least worst candidate? Is that what you're saying?
I think it could turn out that way. I mean, actually, I know the mechanism for exactly how they plan to sort of put together this lightning week-long leadership campaign is, I don't think the details have emerged yet, but raising the bar, so in the end with just one candidate. But it's a very tall order, and you think to yourself, listen, is this party governable at all? It's rhythmless. Well, it's a good question, and it's a question that impacts on the nation, because the markets, as I understand it, are being sort of relatively, well, they just don't know which way to jump at present.
Caught in the headlights.
I'm totally caught in the headlights. A bit like how Jeremy Hunt tends to look. Never mind.
Oh, no, don't be naughty now.
No, sorry about that. Yeah.
Have you ever known
better-
anything
better
like
than he
it, though,
looks
in
like.
all your years of reporting on politics?
God, no, nothing like it. I mean, the eminent political historian Sir Anthony Seldon wrote this morning, this is the most extraordinary crisis since the Second World War. I mean, it sort of rivals the Suez crisis. And he said even the huge crises in the 1970s, at least the cabinet was behind the Prime Minister at the start.
Do you think there's something about when parties have been in power for more than a decade, they just start to lose
Run out
the
of steam.
discipline, the steam, the focus? Is it sort of axiomatic after your party has been in government that you start to go off the rails a bit?
Historical precedent would suggest it most certainly is. And it's logical, they sort of get tired. And also there's the old cliche that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I mean, one has looked no further than President Putin for that. But yeah, I mean, very few parliaments, very few parties have remained in power for much longer than that because, and also just the voters get bored with them.
Yeah, and clearly there's more than boredom this time. There is real worry about how the economic situation is being handled and what will happen, for instance, April onwards when this particular energy price deal runs out. So we are perhaps talking about growing pressures for a general election.
Oh, yes.
There is no doubt, looking at the polls, that it will be a wipeout for the Tories. Some suggestions 200 MPs would go. Does that mean the end of the Tory party as we know it now, that they will have to go back to the drawing board and reassess who they are and where they are?
Well, I mean, I think if Starmer gets his way and there actually is a general election, then of course they will, because, I mean, the polls are sort of unequivocal and unanimous on this subject. I mean, yeah. And it's going to be a really beastly time for them because there'll be such long queues for ex-Tory MPs that they're going to be in serious trouble. But, yeah, of course they will have to regroup totally and work out what it is they stand for and what it is they... Because right now they have no idea.
Yeah.
Just going to go to the Conservative MP for Rushcliffe, Ruth Edwards. Ruth, who is the member for Rushcliffe. Hi, Ruth.
Hi, Gloria, can you hear me?
Hi, I can. I'm so pleased that you are able to join us today. You called for Liz Truss to resign this morning. It's happened, but how hard was it for you to put in that letter?
Well, it was very difficult for me. You know, you haven't seen me much on the media since my election. I'm a team player. I like to be loyal to my party, but I do think what we've seen over the last 4 to 6 weeks has been, shocking. I think what happened in the House of Commons last night, to have MPs misled as to the basis of the vote, and that was, the final straw for me. We can't have, we can't move forward as a team if the team leader treats the foot soldiers in that way, and that's why I submitted.
Oh, Ruth, we're really interested in what you say, but we have actually, lost our Conservative MP. But it's hard, isn't it? It's very hard for MPs when their party is in sort of open warfare to psychologically stand the strain as well. It's a tough decision to do what they have done, but they had no choice, they felt.
Absolutely, and we saw that extraordinary interview from Charles Walker last night, who was livid, he said, at what's been happening. He's been an MP for 17 years, and he's obviously never seen anything like it before. Is Ruth back? It's extraordinary and unprecedented. Words we use a lot now, but now it really is completely absurd, and that sense of disappointment and anger at the colleagues who put Liz Truss in government. And I think there was a big base of MPs who, before Liz Truss was elected, felt that she wasn't quite up to the job, or that her politics were contrary to those of the standard centrist Conservative Party, and they'll now feel that they've been proved right in the most horrible way possible.
Let's actually get back to Ruth. I think we've re-established the line to you, Ruth. I just got a line. I wondered what your reaction to it would be. This is Professor Richard Toy from the University of Exeter, well-known political analyst. Liz Truss may not be remembered as the person who definitively killed the Tories as a political force. That honour will perhaps fall to her successor.
Well, I think we're a long way from that. You've seen my views on why Liz Truss had to go. She's done the right thing this afternoon in doing that. It must have been an incredibly hard thing for her to do. And our job now is to get to select a new leader very quickly. And I'm pleased to see the timetable will be very fast and get on with delivering for the public.
But you've got to go to the public, haven't you? You've got to go now for a general election. You can't go through this sort of coronation process they've spoken of.
No, I don't agree with that. A general election takes at least 6 weeks to run. That would be another prolonged period of uncertainty. I heard Keir Starmer on your programme a few moments ago talking about how united his party is. That is not the case. He's had members of his front bench openly defying him and turning up on pickets of striking trade unions.
Ruth, let me just come back to your party. What will determine who you will support in the leadership contest? What are you looking for?
Well, you will know that I backed Rishi Sunak all summer. Now, whether Rishi is standing this time or not, I don't know. I haven't discussed it with him. If he does put his name forward, I will certainly back him. I will be looking for somebody who has a proven track record, who has economic competence, but also somebody who has great integrity. Rishi lost that vote to members because he told people the truth about what needed to happen rather than what people wanted to happen immediately. And that, to me, is very impressive and the right characteristics that we need in a leader.
Right. Ruth, thank you for that. I'm just going to bring in Charlie, who's still with us in the studio. Your former boss, Michael Gove, has now actually confirmed he is not standing. He was described, we know now, by insiders at Number 10 as a sadist. So what does he do? Does he actually back Kemi Badenoch? Is that the suggestion? Because clearly there was an element of the last leadership campaign where he was actually championing her, should we say?
Well, I think the right thing to do and what Michael will do is wait until you see who those final candidates are before coming to a conclusion. He did back Kemi in the last round to begin with, and obviously when she fell out of the race, he switched to Rishi. So it'll be interesting to see where he throws his support behind.
So where's your money on? We've had obviously the runners and riders so far. So.
Well, I suspect, as I say, he'll wait to see who the final few are. I think Kemi, it may be, because of the political situation that we're in, it may just be too soon for Kemi to come back again. But as I think others have said, you need somebody with slightly more experience, and that's probably who Michael will support.
OK, thank you.
Ruth, you were just being very interesting on the process and what will determine who will get your support. And you were saying that you backed Rishi Sunak last time. How important or otherwise is it for Conservative Party members to have a say in this very short contest?
Well, look, it's certainly preferable, and I think Conservative Party members will be angry if they aren't included. That will require some pretty quick action by the party to make it possible. I've heard people floating the idea of an online vote. That's a possibility. Like I said, this is a call for the party chairman to make with Graham Brady, and I hope they come up with a very workable method very quickly. I'm sure they will.
Is there any prospect of all the potential runners and riders coming together and saying we can't put the party or the country, for that matter, through this, even if it is just a week, and just let one candidate emerge? Is that remotely possible?
I think it is possible. Whether it will happen or not, I don't know. I do think it will be good for the unity of the party if the different candidates can get together and work out a deal. I think that would be a good thing to happen. Whether it does, I don't know. If we do go to a contest, then of course it's right that members are included if that's possible in this short time. And I'm sure the party will be, working as hard as possible to make that possible.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed for your take on it, Ruth, with these very fast-developing news lines coming in, the latest of which is we understanding that Boris Johnson, yes, him, may be considering returning and maybe having a go at power once more. Let's speak to Henry Newman, former special advisor to Boris Johnson. Henry, what are you hearing?
Well, I just read exactly the same thing that you did on Twitter, so I'm completely unsighted on this. But I don't think we can rule anything out at this point.
I mean, is this mischief making, or would he seriously consider it, bearing in mind them's the breaks, I think, was the last that we heard of him outside Downing Street?
I don't know is the answer, but I think that Stephen Swinford's a very respected journalist at the Times. But I think more generally, this is obviously a very difficult period for the Conservative Party and the government. We've had, I think, the shortest premiership really in history. It's been a period that I know that the Conservative Party is going to want to try and put behind us. By the end of the month, on the 28th, we'll have a new leader, a new prime minister. And then just 3 days later, they've got to make that financial statement on which so much depends, trying to chart the course back towards financial stability. And I think what we've seen again is that the Conservative Party, when things aren't working, is willing to be ruthless and to remove prime ministers, which was, I think, what we were always sort of told, that one of the reasons the Conservative Party has been successful historically is its ability to remove party leaders who just simply aren't working.
Is it possible to return to a prime minister who was removed by his party, all those allegations over parties which dominated the news for so long? Would it be remotely feasible to...
I do think anything is possible. I mean, I worked for Boris Johnson for about a year in Downing Street, and I was sitting around the edge of the table watching him make some incredibly difficult decisions. My respect grew for him enormously. Obviously, he had, ends up with with a number of MPs wanting to see him removed. But I think we just don't know now. And there's so much happening, so much sort of turmoil, that a lot will rest on how the dynamics within the parliamentary party go over the next few days. We're also hearing that there could be a consultation of the party membership. We don't know the exact form that will take. I think some of your contributors were speculating whether that could be online. It would probably have to be some sort of thing like that for it to happen quickly enough for it to be viable. I think the constitutional position of the Conservative Party is that the membership have to be consulted. But I think this is clearly a race where a lot of different things could happen.
Henry, thank you for that. Let's put this point to Peter Spencer, who one assumes is now gathering a lot of information and material for several podcasts to come with this suggestion that Boris Johnson will be back. If that is a serious consideration, and let's reflect that he is still very popular amongst the party membership, very popular amongst our viewers. But if the rest of the public see him coming back as Prime Minister, that really would be the last straw for a general election, that Labour and the Lib Dems and the general populace say, no, we've got to have a say in this now.
It does make you wonder, doesn't it? I mean, I sort of disagree with Henry Newman about the shortest ever leader, because Lady Jane Grey only managed 9 days, if I remember correctly. But I mean, what we're looking at here, yeah, sure, it's like the 69 bus. You wait for ages, and then 3 of them come at once. And could it end up as 4? Who knows? I mean, yeah, looking at Boris Johnson, I mean, his nose kept growing and growing as far as we could tell. And so I think it would appear utterly unacceptable to the public to see him coming back. I mean, that said, there's all this will he, won't he, but the fact is that a week or so back, he did a speaking gig in the United States and earned in one evening twice his entire yearly salary. And remember that he has got a certain amount of form when it comes to alimony and one thing and another, and as a result, he's actually got to sort out, and he's lost the little place up above the shop.
No, yeah, and he's got a book that he's been paid in advance for that he hasn't written or published yet as well.
Yes, he's quite good at going through deadlines, but yes.
Henry, just back to you, because this clamour for a general election, actually, if Boris Johnson did return, he could legitimately claim that he had a mandate from the British people, that the manifesto that he was elected on secured that massive majority. Is that a case in favour of Boris Johnson returning to be our Prime Minister?
I'm sure that's an argument that some people will be making. And I think you're right, Gloria, that manifesto was one that won such a decisive majority for the Conservative Party, their biggest majority since the mid-1980s. And I think it was a mistake of the Truss administration to try and present themselves as moving so strongly away from that, because after all, it was very popular. And without a personal mandate herself from the country, she had actually not won the MPs round and then narrowly won the membership round, much more narrowly than had been expected. I think one of the big errors that she made was not building a broad government of all the talents, bringing in people from different wings of the party, but then trying to move away from that manifesto. I don't think there needs to be a general election. I think our system is quite clear that if a party leader can command a majority in the House of Commons and they can win on those votes of so-called supply and confidence, then there's no need to go for election. And indeed, it would mean a great deal of disruption at a moment of economic peril. So I think that the most important thing is that the new leader can win those key votes and can take the decisive steps that are required to stabilise the financial markets.
Henry, thank you for that. Let's bring in Olivia, because you've been scrolling furiously on your phone. I suspect Twitter has gone into meltdown, has it, with everyone having their say?
Yes, Twitter's gone into meltdown. I've heard from former colleagues of mine at The Telegraph that Boris Johnson is going to,
Seriously?
almost definitely, is
Wow.
going to stand. The thing with Boris Johnson, of course, is that he is actually quite popular with the party membership still, but he's now very unpopular with Conservative MPs. So the question is whether he would make it to the final two. And I think there is a path for that to happen. You have Rishi emerging as the sort of unity candidate, the one who all the MPs are backing, and then Boris is there as the sort of stop Rishi candidate. And as we know, Rishi Sunak is very unpopular among the Tory party membership. So extraordinary though it sounds, there is now a path to Boris Johnson becoming Prime Minister again in 1 week's time.
Is he in the Caribbean?
He is in the Caribbean now, but I'm sure he'd be perfectly happy to fly back to take up the mantle.
Flight tracker will be next on your phone. So, yeah, quite.
Can we really... Can you get your head around this proposition?
Not without another coffee, I don't think. Or probably something stronger. Something stronger. But I think, look, I think Henry was right there in what he said. I think the parliamentary party will have to obviously come down to two individuals. There will be the Stop Rishi candidates, there'll be the Stop Boris candidates, or MPs getting behind those two that could sort of counter each other, I suppose. But I think there is this... Michael used a phrase quite sort of, poignant during the Liz years. There's a holiday from reality. And I think the membership and the party needs to get on side with what the country is going to accept. And it didn't accept. The party voted for Liz, but her economic policies weren't right for the country. I think bringing back Boris, who is a great, great man, full of talent, full of great communication skills, is not someone that I think the country would necessarily want to see back.
Let's reflect that all this business now means that governing the country goes out the window for at least another week, perhaps 2 weeks. And that was the great criticism about the Tory leadership campaign, that the real issues of the economy and people worrying about their bills and the cost of living was not being addressed.
And that's why it's absolutely right to have a short, sharp leadership election now, where we have a leader that can emerge, where I think that it would be responsible, in my view, to keep the Chancellor in place. So Jeremy Hunt should not be leaving. Whoever the new leader is, he will remain in post and deliver that fiscal budget on the 31st of October at the end of this month. And there should be strong, a much more stable government than what we've seen in the last few weeks.
Henry, help us understand the Conservative Party and how much influence the membership have on their respective MPs. If MPs would not want Boris Johnson on the ballot, would MPs come under pressure from their associations to put him on the ballot, and would they accede to that pressure? That's how it sort of worked in the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. I'm just wondering if there are parallels in your party.
I think there certainly are some parallels with that. I think there are some MPs who are very set against Boris. There are some MPs who are ferociously loyal to Boris and have remained so. And we've been hearing from some of those already today. And then I think there's a whole raft of MPs in the middle of the parliamentary party, and not sort of on either of those sides, who just want government to work a bit better and are deeply frustrated by what they've seen over the last 45 days. And want the party to come back together and find a new consensus. And I think they'll be willing to do that around a candidate who can sort of take back control of the tiller and stabilise things.
Henry, thank you very much indeed for that. We shall await to see a flight arriving from the Caribbean at Heathrow fairly imminently. Let's say thank you to all our experts. Let's say thank you to you. You've been in touch with your views on all this. David has been in touch to say good afternoon. Good afternoon to you. The only person in the country who has a mandate from the people, having won a general election with an 80-seat majority, to serve as Prime Minister for 5 years is... Boris Johnson.
Mark Bernard says, what happens if the ones that force Truss out don't get who they want? Will it all start again? Because no matter who becomes next Prime Minister, will have to have the backing of all MPs.
Colin, as a Tory party member, I want to vote. My vote would go to Penny Mordaunt.
Tim, dear GB News, we feel Andrea Leadsom is the most experienced person to take this country forward. She has the experience and expertise together with the correct interpersonal skills.
I think she's not on your sweepstake, is she, Andrea Leadsom? You need to add another
I'm
name.
the only one that hasn't had a bet, but you know what? I might have a bet now. I think things are so unstable. I'm going to put my bet on Boris Johnson.
Right, let's ask Peter Spencer who's going to put his money on. What? Oh, you haven't brought any cash. No, if we had an office sweepstake, who is going to be the next Prime Minister, would you think?
Well, I mean, the thing is, they've all got compelling arguments against them, haven't they?
Rather than for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right,
yeah,
OK.
I mean, it brings the question as to whether the Conservative Party is currently totally ungovernable, whether it's just sort of a gang of hoodlums running around sort of waving their machetes, and they can't get their whatever it is together at all.
So none of the above is your vote?
Yeah, pretty much.
Right, OK.
It's been fantastic to see you. Thanks for bringing your wisdom.
And a very pink shirt, even pinker than mine. Excellent.
Political reporter, fantastic Olivia Utley, and what a treat that you were on our show today as it all happened. Thank you so much, Charlie.
Pleasure. Thank you.
So that is another extraordinary day of politics. Liz Truss has gone as leader of the party.